Hey everyone, it's Tobes, and welcome to your second monitor. Today our commander is Xavier Saul Infested Captain. Thanks to Joshua Rees 4097 for requesting this commander. Xavier was once a pirate in the Brazen Coalition, Ixalan's society of pirates led by Admiral Beckett Brass. That was before Xavier was infected by mycoids, fungal creatures who share a hive mind controlled by the Myco Tyrant. Now he resides in the underground mining settlement called Downtown, where he's nominally the mayor. Nice to receive such a promotion, even if it did require him to die and be reanimated by fungus first. Still, imagine his spacious mayoral quarters. He must have so much room. Come on. I'm excited to share what I put together for Xavier, but before we get started, let's go over my deck building template. I like to build my decks around my commander. I want to show off why it's such a cool card and why I put it at the head of my deck. So I take about 30 cards and put them toward doing whatever my commander asks of me. This is our game plan. It's what we do at the table and how we try to win. 30 more cards go towards supporting that game plan in the form of card advantage, acceleration, and interaction pieces. I usually run 1 or 2 sweepers, sometimes more if it would play into the game plan, sometimes none at all, and I always keep to a floor of 38 lands. That way I can always hit my land drops and cast my spells and, play commander. So let's talk about our commander. Xavier Saul Infested Captain is a 3/3 legendary human fungus pirate. I'll let you decide which parts are human and which parts are fungus, but he's all pirate, baby. 4 Sultai mana, a black, a green, and a blue. He has 2 abilities. The first is we tap him and remove a counter from another permanent we control to populate, but only at sorcery speed. Populate means to create a token that is a copy of a creature token we already control. We can also, at sorcery speed, tap Xavier and sack another creature we control to proliferate, meaning we choose any number of permanents and/or players, then give each of them another counter of every kind they already have on them. What a cool card design! Xavier lets us trade one of our counters for an extra token creature, or one of our creatures for a lot more counters. A simple pair of abilities that offer us a lot of flexibility in how we use them. The one drawback is that both are sorcery speed only, but you can't expect quick reactions from a Mushroom Man, no matter how fun a guy he is. In fact, what's especially cool about Xavier Saul is that he and his crew were assimilated into the Myco Tyrant's fungal network as a form of intelligence gathering. As each pirate was absorbed into the mycoid agglomeration, their memories and knowledge became shared among the collective. This means Downtown is full of people who all know the same sea shanties and can sing them in perfect unison. Eat your heart out, 5-year-old Wellerman fad. I like this idea a lot. I imagine all the stories being told on the decks of those pirate ships. So why can't we make those stories the focus of our deck too? That's right, we're doing Sagas. Here's one of my favorites as an example. Sagas are a sweet enchantment type that debuted in Dominaria 2018, and while their rules have been tweaked a few times, they're still pretty simple to understand. We get a chapter effect when they first come in, then we read another chapter at the start of our subsequent turn's first main phases. Once there's no more of the story to tell, we would normally close the book and toss it in the bin. But Xavier knows how important it is to have something to talk about on a long sea voyage, so why not retell the best parts of our tales over and over until the sea air is filled with them? Our game plan centers on playing sagas, primarily ones that make token creatures for us. Then, we graciously let Xavier eat the lore counters off our sagas, giving us extra tokens and resetting those sagas' chapters in the process. Once we have enough powerful sagas in play and creatures hanging out on our battlefield, we can invert the process, sacking a creature to put an extra counter on all our sagas and enjoy the value of our narrative pileup. But lore counters aren't the only ones we're using. We have all kinds of fun counters to feed to our commander. Ability counters, charge counters, some weird ones like Foreshadow and Blight and Flood counters, and of course, the classic +1/+1 counters. And if we don't want to feed them to Xavier, we can instead offer him a repast of one of our tokens to proliferate all of our counters, giving us more power, more toughness, more abilities, and so on. We even have some counters to put on players, both ourselves and others, all of which are able to benefit from proliferation. But no poison in this deck, Xavier isn't that kind of mushroom. The fun doesn't end there. We have a small sub-theme of stealing our opponent's stuff, for our own uses that is, since what kind of pirate would we be if we didn't do any thievery? We have ways of milling our opponents and ourselves, then pulling those cards out of the yard to keep the party going. We have some neat alternative uses for our creatures, token and otherwise, and some ways to untap Xavier and give him another bite at the apple. We've even got some wacky token types and interesting interactions between them, as well as evasion effects, so that we can share the fun with our fellow players. Since our commander's abilities give us options, our deck is full of even more of them. It's a toolbox we can use to create weird, funny board states and ridiculous results no one at the table will expect. We sing our sagas brightly as we chart our new voyage through each game, making friends and working together to keep our boat afloat. And when it's time for the seas to get rough, we show our scallywag opponents the price of confronting a crew of pirates who scoff not only at the law but at the living. They can try to cut us down, but nothing's better than a fungus at growing back from the dead, and it won't be long until they're fleeing spores in favor of shores, babbling to anyone who'll listen about the ship that wasn't quite alive, as our songs ring hauntingly in their ears. We will have taught them a new law of the sea, whether on the open ocean or in the briny deep. Half-dead men tell some tales. You'll enjoy this deck if you love playing with game objects, trading counters for creatures, and vice versa as you build a board too bizarre to be bad. Or if you like the feeling of keeping your opponents guessing as to exactly what you're up to, making them feel like they never get their sea legs under them before the winds change and their ships get wrecked. So, as usual, this Moxfield list we're going over today is linked in the video's description. At the bottom of it, you will see a considering section, filled with cards that I considered putting in the deck, but ultimately which didn't make the cut for me. However, if you have a different budget than me, bigger or smaller, if you like what I've done and you want to go harder into it, or if you like the way Xavier works and you want to kind of shift focus from sagas into something else, maybe like planeswalkers, that considering section is a great place to begin when you build your own Xavier Sol Infested Captain deck. So we're going to begin with the biggest section of our deck. It's the stories we tell. This is our saga section. These are all cards that are sagas or can become sagas. Everything I said before about the sort of general way that sagas work, they get a lore counter when they first come in, and at the start of each pre-combat main phase, or first main phase if you want to think of it that way, and then once the last chapter ability has resolved, and the saga has at least as many lore counters on it as the number of abilities it has, it is sacrificed as a state-based action. That's, again, the normal way sagas work. There are some variations to that we will see in this deck, but we'll get to them when we get to them. So we're going to start with Fall of Gil-galad. This is a Lord of the Rings saga for 1 and a green that says, Chapter 1, we scry 2, so that's a little bit of selection. Chapter 2, we put 2 1/1 counters on a creature we control, so it's got to be one target creature, but that's us putting counters on a creature that we can eat with our commander. And then Chapter 3, until end of turn, target creature you control gains when this creature dies, draw 2 cards, and then that creature fights up to 1 target creature. So we've got a little bit of optional removal here, and we've got the ability to maybe draw some cards from that creature. We've got plenty of ways to sacrifice our creatures in this deck, as well as, just that fight ability is a good way to trade one of our token creatures for a creature that an opponent has that they actually paid mana for, and then we get to replace both that token and the Fall of Gil-galad since we're drawing 2 cards. So pretty sweet for us to use here. The way we normally use these sagas with our commander is by saying, okay, Fall of Gil-galad comes in, and we're going to eat that first lore counter on it after the ability triggers. That means that the next turn, it's going to get a lore counter and it will trigger its first ability again, since that's the number of lore counters it has on it. Alternatively, we can play this, let it give us that scry, and then at the next turn, it will trigger its second ability. We put 2 counters on something, and we can use Xavier Sol to eat that second lore counter on it, meaning the next turn, it's going to trigger its second ability again. It's also possible that we might just go to our second turn, get those 2 counters, and then immediately get the third trigger as well when we use Xavier Sol to sacrifice a creature and proliferate the lore counters on it. So we can repeat chapters we've already done, or we can speed our way through it, depending on which direction we're going with Xavier. That's how we use him with these sagas. So let's keep going. We've got Teachings of the Kirin next. This is a Kamigawa Neon Dynasty flip saga. The way this works is, for 1 and a green, we get a saga that, Chapter 1, mills us 3 cards and makes us a 1/1 colorless spirit creature token. So we get a token that we can immediately eat if we want to with Xavier in order to bump ourselves up to the next chapter, both on this saga and on all of our sagas, putting more counters on everything if we want to. It's also worth noting that milling in our deck, we have some ways of using the cards in our graveyard, both recursion and like repeated recursion, things like that. And a little bit of reanimate as well, to be honest. So self-mill is pretty nice for us. Second chapter is we put a 1/1 counter on a creature. That's fine. And then the third chapter is we exile this saga and return it to the battlefield transformed under our control, meaning we will not sacrifice it because by the time it comes back into play, it's a new game object, and it's flipped over into Kirin Touched Orochi. This is a 1/1 enchantment creature Snake Monk that says whenever it attacks, we can either exile a creature card from a graveyard, doesn't have to be our own, and when we do, we make a 1/1 spirit, or we can exile a non-creature card from a graveyard to put a 1/1 counter on a creature we control, which could even be the Orochi. So the front side and the back side both make tokens and put counters on things, which is everything we want to do. It even mills us with that first chapter ability, which gives us the ability to have cards, creature and otherwise, in our graveyard. Again, we don't have to steal things from our graveyard to activate the Orochi's triggered ability, or power the Orochi's triggered ability, I should say. But yeah, it's nice to have the option. Next we have Tribute to Hirobi, another Neon Dynasty flip saga. This is a weird one, and I'm just really excited to be able to see it in a deck that doesn't care about rats, as its whole thing. This is a saga for 1 and a black, and says for the first and second chapter, each opponent creates a 1/1 black rat rogue creature token. So we're giving 1/1 rats to our opponents. Maybe they attack or block with them, maybe they sacrifice them, whatever they want to do, we're giving out these rogues. It's just sweet rats. And then, Chapter 3, we exile it, and it comes back transformed as a 3/3 flyer with haste called Echo of Death's Wail. This is an enchantment creature saga that says when it enters, gain control of all rat tokens. So even though we gave our opponents these rat rogues, they are tokens and they are rats, so we get to steal them right back if they are still on the battlefield. And then, whenever Echo of Death's Wail attacks, we can sacrifice another creature, maybe one of those rats, and draw a card for it. So this gives us another sacrifice outlet for our mini tokens that we can turn into cards that way, and it lets us steal the rats back when we just spent a bunch of turns, at least 2 turns, maybe more with Xavier, giving our opponents rats. Seems fun. Next we have Awaken the Honored Dead. This is a black, a green, and a blue, so the same cost as our commander, for a saga that says Chapter 1, destroy target non-land permanent. 3 mana to blow up anything that isn't a land is pretty great, especially if we can just use Xavier to eat that lore counter and do it again the next turn. It might be us blowing up something every turn. Man, that's kind of mean, but I mean, if that's what we need in that moment, sure, why not? Chapter 2 mills us 3 cards, and Chapter 3 lets us discard a card, and when we do, we return target creature or land card from our graveyard to our hand. So that means it can either be one of these cards we milled already, it could be something we've already got from the graveyard in a different way because we milled something or we had a creature die or we just discarded something. In any case, we can bring something back. So a little bit of recursion for us here once we get to Chapter 3. Ballad of the Black Flag is next. This is an Assassin's Creed card, and it's one of the 2 cards I put in this deck just because they seem fun with a pirate as our commander. It's also good in our deck. So this is 1 in double blue for a saga that says Chapters 1, 2, and 3, we mill 3 cards and we can put a historic card from among them into our hand. Historic cards are cards that are either artifacts, legendary, or are sagas. Like I mentioned, we have 30 sagas in this deck, or 30 cards that can be sagas. We also have a bunch of artifacts and legends for a total number of 46 cards in this deck that are sagas. Now, or that are historic rather. Now obviously we can't see all of them with Ballad of the Black Flag because it is itself a saga, so it's one of those 46, and our commander is not going to get milled. So that's down to 44, which is still 4/9 of our deck. That seems pretty great to me. So this is essentially drawing us a card, milling us 3, and in all likelihood one of those, at least one, is going to be something we can put into our hand. Sweet. The last chapter is historic spells you cast this turn cost 2 generic less to cast, which is amazing. Being able to get a huge discount on all of the spells in our deck that have generic mana costs and are historic, which is most of our historic spells, is pretty great. Obviously, we're not going to get a discount on this on something like, Awaken the Honored Dead because it doesn't have any generic mana costs in its casting cost. And I know you're thinking, well, does this discount our commander? It does, when we're casting him from the command zone for any time after the first, because the first time Xavier Sol just costs a black, a blue, and a green. But if we're having to recast him, the commander tax adds 2 generic to his cost, and Ballad of the Black Flag will take that off. So pretty nice. Jugen Defends the Temple is next, another Kamigawa saga. For 2 and a green, we get a Saga that at Chapter 1 makes us a 1/1 green human monk creature token with tap to add a green. So it is a human monk rather than an elf, but it might as well be a Llanowar elf. So for 3 mana, we get a mana dork. That seems pretty good. We can keep doing that if we want with Xavier Sol. Also, Chapter 2 is put a 1/1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures, so a total of 2 counters that we can later eat with our commander, or we can proliferate with our commander. We just have to have 2 different creatures to put them on, and since it already gave us 1, that seems alright. Third chapter is we exile it, and it comes back as Remnant of the Rising Star, a 2/2 enchantment creature dragon spirit with flying. So we get a 2/2 flyer that says whenever another creature we control enters, we can pay any amount of mana and put that many 1/1 counters on the creature that just entered. Pretty great. A way for us to sink our mana into our creatures if we maybe have, an extra land lying around that only taps for colorless and we just don't need it this turn. Well, if we have a creature come in, we can tap it and put some counters on it that, again, we can either proliferate or eat with Xavier to populate. Great. And as long as we control 5 or more modified creatures, Remnant of the Rising Star gets +5/+5 and has trample, becoming a 7/7 Flampler, flying trample. Yeah, very powerful. Modified creatures are creatures that are either equipped, that have auras enchanting them that we control, or have counters on them. We really care about the counters in this deck, but we do have some equipment in this deck, and who knows, maybe an aura that we control is going to go on to one of our creatures. Do we have any of those auras in this deck? No, we don't. So we're not going to be modifying our creatures with auras, but we will modify them with equipment and definitely with counters. As long as we get up to 5 of them, and it can include itself, Remnant of the Rising Star becomes a 7/7 flying trample, and that seems pretty great. Next up, we have King Narfi's Betrayal, a great card originally printed in Kaldheim. This is 1, a blue and a black, for a Saga that says each player mills 4 cards, and then we can exile a creature or planeswalker card from each graveyard. So hopefully, when we cast this, whether those cards that were milled contained creatures or planeswalkers, or those graveyards already had creatures and or planeswalkers in them, hopefully this lets us exile 4 cards, 1 from each player, including ourselves, and we just tuck them under King Narfi's Betrayal. Then, chapters 2 and 3, until end of turn, you may cast spells from among the cards exiled with the Saga, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast those spells. So this is one of our Thievery cards. We want to be able to take creatures or planeswalkers from every player's graveyard, put them under King Narfi's Betrayal, and cast them. It does not limit us to 1 per turn, so if we have enough mana, we could cast all 4 of those things, when chapter 2 resolves, and then we don't even get anything for chapter 3, but in all likelihood, we want to split it up between the 2. However, with our commander, if we want to eat this counter off of it after the first chapter ability resolves, we can exile more cards each time. Every time this resolves, everyone's going to mill 4, and we're going to exile more and more creatures and planeswalkers. And then once we've got enough exiled, we just let it go to chapter 2 and start casting them. And if we want to keep having turns to cast them, we eat the counter off of it for chapter 2 and let it trigger chapter 2 again. And then we can just let it go to chapter 3 whenever we're ready to cast those last spells, or when we're just done with it. If there is a way for us to eat 2 counters off of King Narfi's Betrayal, which you may see some ways to do later on in the deck, we could have everyone mill, exile some cards, go to chapter 2, cast some of those cards, eat 2 counters off of it, putting it to 0, and then have people mill and let us exile even more things that we can cast the turn after. Or that same turn if we proliferate. Yeah. So lots of fun can be had with King Narfi's Betrayal as a way to kind of simulate recursion for ourselves, but also steal things from our opponents. That seems pretty good. Summon Fenrir is next. This is an enchantment creature, Saga Wolf. It is a Saga creature. This is a Final Fantasy type of card that they just introduced with the Final Fantasy set. That's pretty sweet. It's 2 and a green for a 3/2 that says Chapter 1 Crescent Fang. It's just rampant growth. We search our library for a basic land rather, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. So that is something that, if nothing else, tapping Xavier Sol, because he doesn't require us to do anything but tap him. We don't have to pay mana or life or anything else. We can just eat this counter off of Fenrir, and we've paid 3 mana for a 3/2 essentially vanilla creature that rampant growths us every turn that we keep eating that counter off of. Or we can move to chapter 2, Heavenward Howl, that says when you cast when you next cast a creature spell this turn, that creature enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. So we could keep this going as well, and have our creatures continually enter with 1/1 counters whenever we have creature spells. Now it's only the first creature that we cast after this triggers, and it's only creatures we cast rather than token creatures that are made by our Sagas or any other effect. But it is a nice way to put counters on our things that we can either proliferate or that we can eat in order to populate. But typically when I have played with this deck, I'm doing a lot of this. I like to be able to have my commander essentially say tap and rampant growth and just do that every turn. That seems pretty great as a way to accelerate, as a way to build out my mana base. If I happen to miss a land drop or something, it doesn't matter because I'm rampant growthing. Yeah, seems good. Finally, Elliptic Growl says draw a card if you control the creature with the greatest power or tied for the greatest power, which may be the case. We're putting counters on our things, we're populating our creature count, and we're proliferating those counters. We might have something really big, and if we don't, that's fine because it's still the third chapter ability for this card. Notably, Saga creatures are creatures, however, meaning when it first comes in, it will get its first trigger, but it's a creature, so it has Summoning Sickness. Next turn, it will get its second trigger, assuming we're not doing anything fun with its counters, and it can attack if we want to. The third turn, at the start of our pre-combat main phase, this ability will trigger, it will resolve, and Summon Fenrir will be sacrificed. So we don't get to just keep it as a creature, even after it's all done with its Saga stuff. We treat it like a Saga that can also attack and block. Yeah. Next up is, this is such a cool card. This is the Aesir Escape Valhalla from Assassin's Creed. 2 and a green for a Saga that says, Chapter 1, exile a permanent card from your graveyard and you gain life equal to its mana value. That's really cool. Getting a little life out of a permanent that we're bringing back, sweet. You know, it's just a nice way to regrow something in a way. We're exiling it, so we're not going to be able to cast it again yet, but we gain some life from it. And if it was like a land or something, well, we don't gain any life, but we can hit that land with it if we want to. Then Chapter 2 is we put a number of 1/1 counters on a creature we control equal to the mana value of the exiled card. So if, for example, we had our Summon Fenrir sacrifice itself, we could play the Aesir Escapes Valhalla, exile Summon Fenrir, it will get exiled under this Saga, and we'll gain 3 life since that is its mana value. Next turn, we'll put 3 1/1 counters on one of our creatures, because again, that's its mana value. And then Chapter 3 is we return this Saga and the exiled card to our hand, meaning we can cast both Summon Fenrir again and this Saga again and do this whole thing all over again. So it's a little bit of a slow way to regrow a permanent, but in the process we gain life, we get counters, and we protect it from leaving our graveyard by way of graveyard hate from our opponents. So plus we're getting triggers from casting our Saga, if we have any of the triggers in our deck, the payoff cards that care about that, as well as we're able to play with this, with these counters with our commander, or proliferate them. So if we want to have this come in and immediately gain value from it in the form of counters, we can just proliferate this lore counter, and we will have gained life and gotten counters that same turn. And we just wait till our pre-combat main phase on our next turn, and we put the card that was in our graveyard right back in our hand with this Saga, and we can do it all over again. Cool. Next is the first Iroan games. This is from Theros Beyond Death, and it's really cool. What a great story. This is the Olympics for the Plane of Theros. It's 2 and a green for a Saga that says, Chapter 1, make a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. You gotta have a competitor. Chapter 2, put 3 1/1 counters on a creature you control. It could even be that soldier. Chapter 3, if you control a creature power 4 or greater, which maybe you do, draw 2 cards. And Chapter 4, create a gold token. A gold token is a predefined artifact token that is just a treasure that doesn't require you to tap it. It says just sacrifice it, add 1 mana of any color. So what a nice number of things we can do here. We use Xavier Sol to eat the lore counters on this and make multiple soldiers, or continually put 3 counters on our creatures, or continually draw 2 cards every turn. Each of those taps of Xavier Sol essentially means make a new token creature That's the same as a token creature the same as a token creature you already have. And in the process, at the start of your next turn, you're going to get great value. Sweet. We can also proliferate to blow our way through this if we want to. Just good times either way. The Huntsman's Redemption is next. This is 2 and a green for a saga that says, Chapter 1, make a 3/3 beast. Seems good. Chapter 2, you may sacrifice a creature, and if you do, search your library for a creature or basic land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, and shuffle. So, tutor for a creature or a basic land. All it costs us is a creature, and we just got one last turn. If we don't want to sacrifice it, we can sacrifice something else, even a non-token creature. If we want to find the best creature that we need for that situation, or a basic, either way. It's especially nice if we want to use Xavier Sol to either make multiple beasts or keep letting us sacrifice creatures in order to put something great in our hand. Awesome. Finally, Chapter 3, up to 2 target creatures, each gain +2/+2 and gain trample until end of turn. So we get to do a little bit of strong attacking with a little bit of evasion. Seems good to me. All the stories of Garrick and everything he dealt with Liliana and the Chain Veil, and finally in original Eldraine when they lifted the curse. The Sea Devils is next. This is another card I put in because I have no idea what this Doctor Who episode that's featured here is about. All I know is the Sea Devils sounds like a thing that you would talk about with pirates, and this card does ridiculous things. Check this out. 2 and a green for a saga, with the first 2 chapters saying, create a 2/2 green alien salamander creature token with Island Walk. Island Walk being, those tokens cannot be blocked if the defending player controls an island. That's crazy. We can't really guarantee that our opponents are going to have islands, or can we? Stay tuned. But most importantly, we're making tokens that we can use for our commander. Sure, sounds great. We can populate and make more green alien salamanders with Island Walk. Maybe that's good. And it might be, because Chapter 3 is, until end of turn, whenever a salamander deals combat damage to a player, it deals that much damage to target creature that player controls. So if we have pumped up these salamanders, if we attack with them, we can have them bite a creature that the player we hit controls, and hopefully we hit that player because that player has islands. Just a weird card that I just don't ever see it. So I wanted to put it in this deck because it's neat. It does several things that we like. And it's linked to a different card that we will see later. Next up is the Weatherseed Treaty. This is from Dominaria United, so it is a saga for 2 and a green that has Read Ahead. Read Ahead is an ability that means if we want, normally we always start a saga on Chapter 1. But with Read Ahead, we can start on any chapter. We just don't get the prior chapters if we read ahead with it. So if we want, Weatherseed Treaty can come in, and maybe we say we want it to start on Chapter 2. So it will enter with 2 lore counters, we will just get a Sapperling, we won't get to do this first ability, and the next turn it will get a 3rd lore counter, we'll get this last ability, and we will be done with it. So I don't typically like to read ahead on my read ahead sagas, but it's nice to have the flexibility to do so. I just want to get the most value out of them that I can, especially with Xavier Sol giving us the ability to play with it. So for example, if we really wanted a token creature, we could get one right away and then eat that counter with Xavier so that next turn we get another Sapperling. Pretty good. In any case, Chapter 1 is just rampant growth. We search our library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped and shuffle. Chapter 2 makes us a 1/1 Sapperling, and Chapter 3 is a domain ability. It says target creature we control gets +X/+X and gains trample until end of turn, where X is the number of basic land types among lands you control. So if we have a land that has the island type and a land that has the forest type, but no lands with the swamp type, then that creature is going to get +2/+2. If we have a land, or if we have an island, a swamp, and a forest, it'll be +3/+3, which is us sort of capping out in this deck. And we get trample either way, even if we don't have any lands with basic types. Neat. Next is Timoret Calls the Dead. 2 and a black for a saga that says Chapters 1 and 2, we mill 3 cards, again, helping our graveyard out, and then we can exile a creature or enchantment from our graveyard. We got a lot of enchantments in this deck, mostly sagas. And if we do, we make a 2/2 black zombie creature token. So another way to use the cards in our graveyard, and we get a zombie token from it. And we can keep doing this if we want to keep repeating Chapters 1 and 2. Finally, Chapter 3 is we gain an amount of life and scry that same amount, where that amount is the number of zombies we control. Now, we don't really have that many ways of making zombies in this deck other than Timuret Calls the Dead, but we do have one, which we'll see in a later saga. It's interesting in this deck how there's overlap in a number of different creature types, some of which are weird, like salamanders, but also zombies and, as you'll soon see, mutants. And they just sort of all work together. So, cool things going on in this deck that give us weird, interesting, unexpected board states. Just one of the things I like about it. So next, we've already looked at Binding the Old Gods, but let's talk about what it does. 2 and a black and a green, so 2 a black and a green, for a saga that says, Chapter 1, destroy target non-land permanent an opponent controls. So this is the same first chapter as we saw with Awaken the Honored Dead, except that it has to be something that an opponent controls. That's fine. We probably didn't want to destroy one of our own things with Awaken the Honored Dead anyway, even though we could have brought it back with Awaken the Honored Dead's third ability. So this is just solid removal. Blow up anything that isn't a land that our opponents control. Then Chapter 2, we get to search our library for a forest card, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. This does not say basic forest, which means we can go find one of our dual-typed lands, of which we have a number. There are a few ways in this deck to find land cards that are non-basic, and this is one of them. So since it's coming in tapped anyway, we have a few lands that are tapped lands, like Bicycle lands or our Tango lands count as well, that are forests but are also islands, or forests but also swamps. So we can fix our mana a little bit better than just finding a basic forest, although that's also fine for us to do, since that is our most populous color. Finally, Chapter 3, creatures we control gain Death Touch until end of turn. I have often said Death Touch is pseudo-evasion, because we have 40 life in Commander. So if you have 3 1/1 tokens, and they all have Death Touch now, we can swing with them, and our opponent's going to say, well, unless I have creatures that I just want to throw away or want to die, I don't want to trade my creatures for your tokens. I'd rather just give up my 3 life. So they're going to choose not to block, and therefore that's evasion. Assuming, of course, they don't have something like protection or indestructible on their creatures. So yeah, Death Touch. This is one of the chapter abilities for many of our sagas. We have this sort of final ability that is nice, but not game-breaking, like all our creatures get Death Touch, or our creatures get a Power and Toughness bonus and Trample. It's a nice effect. It's not a game-changing effect, but we don't mind it. So yeah, there are ways we can put it to our use. For example, Binding the Old Gods, if its third chapter ability is triggering in the same chapter as the Sea Devil's third chapter ability, then our salamanders are going to do combat damage to a player, and then do that much damage to a creature that player controls, and when they do, they have Death Touch, so sure, it just kills those creatures. Sometimes it works that way. And it doesn't require that much of a timing plan to have it happen if we're able to change the number of counters on our sagas thanks to Xavier Sol. So it seems like, oh, what a weird coincidence that may not ever come up. But you never know, it could come up more than you think. Death Touch can be helpful in a number of different ways because we have a bunch of different sort of bite and also fight effects in this deck. Or I shouldn't say a bunch, a few. So yeah, it is more relevant than it seems with just its pseudo-evasive quality. Anyway, next up is Death in Heaven. This is another Doctor Who card for 3 and a black. The first and second chapters are target player mills 2 and then exiles their graveyard. We probably don't want to do this to ourselves, but we sure could if we've got a lot of creatures in our graveyard, because Chapter 3 is put all creature cards exiled with this enchantment onto the battlefield face down under your control, and they are 2/2 Cyberman artifact creatures. That means we don't get any of their abilities unless we had some way to, flicker them and keep them under our control or flip them face up, neither of which are in this deck. It's not really what we're looking for. What we want to do is keep whichever players we have targeted with this from reanimating any of their creatures, from getting them back in any way. We mill them, we exile their whole graveyard. We can keep doing that if we use Xavier Sol to keep triggering these abilities by eating the war counters off of it. And eventually, Death in Heaven is going to have plenty of creature cards exiled under it, probably at least a few, and we get to turn those into 2/2 creatures, which are not tokens, but we can treat them like they were by sacrificing them. We can't populate them, but we can sacrifice them to Xavier Sol in order to proliferate, which is pretty nice. Also, we can attack with them, we can block with them, we can sacrifice them to other effects. Yeah, we've got lots of good uses for those 2/2s, especially that we have denied them going back to their opponent's control. Nice. Next up, we have Rite of Belzenlock. This is a sweet card from Dominaria 2018. For 2 and double black, the first and second chapters make 2 0/1 black cleric creature tokens each time. So by the time we get to chapter 3, we've made 4 clerics. Again, great tokens that we can sacrifice to our commander in order to proliferate, but we can also hang on to them because chapter 3 makes a 6/6 black demon creature token with flying, trample, and at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice another creature, and if you can't, it deals 6 damage to us. So we have to feed this 6/6 flying trampler a creature every turn. Good thing we just put 4 of those creatures on the battlefield for us. Yeah, pretty sweet. I really like being able to say Rite of Belzenlock comes in, make 2 clerics. Next turn, it makes 2 more clerics. We sack one with Xavier Sol immediately to proliferate, going to chapter 3, making our demon, and now, at the start of our next turn, we eat one of our clerics. We're down to 2 clerics, but we can start eating counters off of our other sagas to populate that demon, which means we have a lot more creatures we need to eat, but we get a 6/6 flyer again. Seems neat. Legend of Kuruk is next. This is an Avatar the Last Airbender card, and it's sweet. This is another flip saga, but it works a little differently than the Kamigawa ones. Actually, it works pretty similarly. This is 2 and double blue for a saga that says chapters 1 and 2, preordain. Scry 2 and then draw a card. Sweet. Love a little bit of repeated card draw. Then chapter 3, we exile it, and it comes back as Avatar Kuruk. If you know Avatar, but you don't know who this is the Avatar that came 3 before Aang. Aang was preceded by Avatar Roku, who came after Avatar Kyoshi, and Avatar Kuruk came before Kyoshi. And if you want to go one more back, it's Yangchen, just in case you're interested. Anyway, Avatar Kuruk is a legendary avatar with power and toughness 4/3 that says whenever we cast a spell, we make a 1/1 colorless spirit creature token that can't block or be blocked by non-spirit creatures. So usually these are unblockable creatures, assuming our opponents don't have any spirits, but also creatures that can't block, so we want to be able to attack with these. So we want to put counters on them, make them bigger, and be scary with them. Or sacrifice them, since they can't block anyway, to our commander in order to proliferate. But I want to note, it says whenever you cast a spell. That's any spell we cast. Every spell we're casting gives us a token as well, so that really helps feed our commander's desire to proliferate. Also, Avatar Kuruk has an exhaust ability, meaning we can only ever activate it once while Kuruk is in play. It is Waterbend 20. Waterbending means we pay that much mana, but we can also tap creatures and or artifacts, and each one we do pays 1 mana of it. Now, are we going to be able to get 20 mana, or 20 between our mana, creatures, and artifacts in order to activate this? Maybe not, but it's a nice aspirational thing to go for. And what do we get if we do it? We take an extra turn. I don't typically use extra turn effects in my decks because I feel like they are on a different power level than what I'm really looking for. But I don't think anyone at the table is going to fault you for waterbending 20 and getting an extra turn out of it. So yeah, and of course these spirits can be used for that as well. Nice. Next up is the Trickster God's Heist. What a cool card in this deck. This is 2, a blue and a black, for a saga that says, Chapter 1, you may exchange control of 2 target creatures. It doesn't say a creature you control and a creature you don't control. So we can take opponent B's commander and opponent A's commander and swap them. They get to just control each other's commanders, and they've got to figure that out themselves. That's if we want to cause just mayhem. But it's often what we're gonna do with this is we take one of our 0/1 cleric creature tokens and trade it for an opponent's commander, or trade it for an opponent's giant creature, or value piece like Galta or something along those lines. Just give away something that's little that we have for something huge and awesome that they have. We get to do a little bit of Oko Thief of Crownsing on them. So pretty fun. It's also worth noting that if we do a commander with this, it has not changed zones, it's only changed controllers. So they don't get to put it in the command zone in response to save it from going into our control. So yeah, Trickster God's Heist, just Chapter 1 is fun. Chapter 2 is we can exchange control of 2 target non-basic, non-creature permanents that share a card type. So we already got to do creatures. The second one is anything else that isn't a creature and isn't a basic land. Meaning, we can exchange control of lands if we want to. We can steal someone's land in exchange for one of our lands, as long as they're not basics. Yeah, I guess you could do that. That seems fine. If maybe they've got a really sweet land that produces multiple mana. Maybe you're stealing someone's Yavimaya, or maybe not Yavimaya, but like their Itlamok Cradle of Growth that they flipped over, so you've got a whole lot of green mana. I don't know. This is a possibility. But it's usually going to be used for something like, oh, well, we have a treasure token and they have a Panharmonicon. I'm going to trade those artifacts. Or we have an opponent that has a doubling season. And we have a bunch of enchantments. So we're going to trade one of our enchantments away. And that enchantment could be the Trickster God's Heist itself. So maybe if an opponent has an awesome enchantment in play, we just give away this Saga and steal their really cool enchantment. Maybe we get their doubling season, for example, or their extravagant replication. Whatever it may be, we give away the Trickster God's Heist. And then, Chapter 3 is target player loses 3 life and you gain 3 life, which means if we've given away the Trickster God's Heist, that opponent will get to gain 3 life and another player will lose 3. And it's probably going to be us, since we stole from them. But after that happens, the Trickster God's Heist goes to our graveyard. So if we're going to recur it, we could do this all over again. It's also true, remember, we can use Xavier Sol to repeat Chapter 1 or Chapter 2, depending on where we are in it, as many times as we want by just eating the lore counters off of it. Imagine seeing that we have a whole bunch of little 0/1 or 1/1 tokens, and our opponents are just fielding bigger and bigger awesome creatures. We can just keep stealing those creatures and giving them our little tokens. Or we could steal other things if an opponent's running like a cool artifact stack. Yeah, we don't have to steal from the same player every time, but if they've got something cool and synergistic, we might as well take their cool synergistic pieces and say, hey, this is the best way I can think to appreciate your deck. It's by playing it for you. Our piracy. Next up, we have Time of Ice, a card that I truly love from original Dominaria 2018 because it depicts the Ice Age of the plane of Dominaria. And I really love how, even though it's been moved away from in a lot of more, the last few years of Sagas, I love how early on, Sagas had an art piece that was meant to represent the story that the saga tells, but in the style of art of the people who would have made it. For example, we saw Binding the Old Gods. This is Victor Adame Minga's actually carving this out of wood. This is a photograph. It's not a painting. So this is something that they would have done on the plane of Kaldheim. There's another awesome red-black saga from Kaldheim that is just a giant bicep tattoo that you get to see the art of that talks about, I think it's the Blood Sky Massacre. Yeah, but in any case, Time of Ice, this sweet medieval style piece of art, it's a tapestry. If you look really close, you can see the frayed threads on it and such. Anyway, it's the story of Ice Age, which also is nostalgic for me because I started playing Magic in '95, which is with the set Ice Age. So yeah, love it. Any case, Time of Ice is a saga for 3 and a blue that says Chapters 1 and 2, tap a creature an opponent controls and it doesn't untap during its controller's untap step for as long as you control this saga. So do we want to use Xavier Sol to eat a counter off of this during Chapter 1 and 2 every turn, thereby locking down a new creature every turn and keeping those creatures from untapping for as long as we continue to do this? We sure can. And when we're tired of that, we get to Chapter 3 and we return all tapped creatures to their owner's hands. We bounce everything tapped, which is going to include all of these creatures. So, as well as any creatures that, that did some attacking last turn without having vigilance or getting untapped some other way, we can time it so that this is something going off when we get the most value out of it, especially from all this. Awesome. Next up is Song of Eärendil. I do not speak Elvish. I assume this is Elvish. I'm not a Lord of the Rings person, I should just say that. So if you know how this is pronounced and what it is and why, please let me know in the comments below. I'm interested to know. I'm going to just awkwardly keep mispronouncing it. This is 3 and a green and a blue for a Saga that says Chapter 1, scry 2 and draw 2. This is normally, this is like Tamio's Epiphany. This is a 4-mana blue spell for this effect. So for just 1 more mana, we're getting that and then 2 other things. Chapter 2 is create a treasure token and make a 2/2 blue bird creature token with flying. So that's pretty great too. Just, we could keep repeating this and getting extra card draw and selection, or we can move here and get a little bit of acceleration and a token that we can use to either populate it, or we could sack to proliferate things. Seems good. And finally, Chapter 3 is even better because it gives all of the creatures we control that don't have flying a flying counter. Meaning, this is an ability counter. It just goes on them. It doesn't change anything about them except that it grants the ability flying. So our whole board becomes evasive, essentially. Everything that didn't already fly gets a counter. And if we don't need them to have those counters, we can eat these counters off of those creatures in order to populate with Xavier Sol. Neat. Summon Shiva is next. This is another Final Fantasy Saga creature. It is a 4/5 enchantment creature Saga Elemental for 3 and double blue that says, first 2 turns, Heavenly Strike. Tap target creature an opponent controls and put a stun counter on it. So, good. Just taps it down. And then Diamond Dust is our third ability. Draw a card for each tapped creature your opponents control. Could be from them attacking, could be because we tapped them down and put stun counters on them. Either way. But what's especially nice is stun counters are counters, and proliferate doesn't only affect permanents we control. So we can proliferate the stun counters on our opponent's creatures, the ones that we've put there or that got there in any other way, by using Xavier Sol and sacrificing a creature of our own. So sweet. Seems really good to be able to keep stacking those up. I like that. And just, again, we can keep eating lore counters off of this beforehand to keep stunning things down. Neat. Similar, in a way, is Summon Valifor. 4 and a blue for a 5/4 Saga Drake. It's an enchantment creature, so it's just like the last one. It's going to do the thing where once its last ability resolves, it's going to be sacrificed, but still, it's a 5/4 flyer. In the meantime, it flies. It's a Drake. Its first ability is Sonic Wings. Each opponent chooses a creature with the greatest mana value among creatures they control and puts it back in their hand. We could just keep doing this every turn, and that's super annoying. Our opponents might decide to remove our commander if that's the case, but our commander only costs 3 mana. We could easily get him back. Or they can remove Summon Valifor, and then they don't have to worry about that anymore, and we can do more things with our commander. But if they choose to remove our commander so that we can't keep repeating this, we're just going to move on to the next section, which is tap up to 1 target creature and put a stun counter on it for chapters 2, 3, and 4. So again, we can keep this going for as long as we want to, and we might want to for a cool reason, which we will see in the interaction section. Next up is the Cruelty of Gix. This is 3 and double black for a Saga with read ahead, because it's from Dominaria United, so we can jump ahead in our chapters if we want. And sometimes we might do it, because chapter 1, his target opponent reveals their hand, and we choose a creature or planeswalker from it, and they discard that card. So not ideal, because I don't love hand attack. But some people don't mind it. It's solid disruption. There's nothing wrong with that, and it can be helpful to us for another reason, which we will see in a moment. Creature or planeswalker goes to their graveyard. Then chapter 2, search our library for a card, put it in our hand, shuffle, lose 3 life. This is Grim Tutor, which is just a 3-mana black spell. It's another tutor for us, and we can find any card with it. I don't typically like to put tutors in my decks that aren't for, lands, but we have a little bit of tutoring in this deck, like we have the Huntsman's Redemption that we've already seen. Cruelty of Gix essentially is drawing us a card here, and it's whatever card we may need, and it's costing us 3 life, and that's fine. Finally, chapter 3 is we can put a creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. That is a graveyard, not your graveyard. So we can steal our opponent's creatures out of their graveyards with this ability, and it could be a creature that we had them discard in chapter 1. So pretty nice effect for us. Now my favorite one, which we will talk about in just a moment. And now it's that moment. This is the Eldest Reborn. This is from Dominaria 2018. It's 4 and a black, so same as Cruelty of Gix, but slightly easier to cast, or same mana value, I should say. And it says, Chapter 1, each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker of their choice. We don't get to force them to discard the card we've chosen, but something that's on the battlefield, they've got to get rid of it. Chapter 2, each opponent discards a card. We're hitting every opponent with this, but they get to choose. It doesn't have to be a creature, it could be a land, it could be whatever they want. That's fine. Then, Chapter 3 is put target creature or planeswalker card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So another way for us to reanimate something of our own or steal something from our opponents, either way. And it's interesting that Cruelty of Gix lets us force our opponent to discard a creature or planeswalker, but only reanimate a creature, while the Eldritch Reborn reanimates a creature or planeswalker, since it's having them sacrifice a creature or planeswalker. It's kind of an interesting interaction, and I like the sort of mirror here. Obviously, Cruelty of Gix is stronger. It's got an unconditional tutor in it, but I don't know. I'm less scared of Gix and much more scared of Bolas. Anyway. Next up is Vault 87 Forced Evolution from the Fallout decks. This is 3, a green, and a blue for a saga that says, Chapter 1, gain control of target non-mutant creature for as long as you control this saga. So we can just steal someone's commander, steal someone's huge creature, their Spearbreaker Behemoth, whatever it may be. As long as it's not a mutant, we can take it, and we get to keep it for as long as we want, because we can keep eating lore counters off this saga and keep a hold of it. Maybe we eat the first one off and we steal another creature and another creature. We just keep taking creatures from our opponents, and we get to keep them as long as we have this saga. Neat. Chapter 2 is we put a 1/1 counter on a creature we control, and it becomes a mutant in addition to its other types. Now, notably, if we choose one of the creatures or the creature that we stole with the first chapter ability, we don't lose control of it, because even though it is now a mutant, so it wouldn't qualify, we only care about it being a non-mutant when we target and when this ability resolves. Once this ability has resolved, it no longer matters what type that creature is. We just get to keep control of it for as long as we control the saga. So don't worry about pumping up that creature if you choose to. But I might not, just because, it's going to go back to our opponent with that counter on it. But maybe you want to, because Chapter 3 is draw cards equal to the greatest power among mutants you control. So if we stole Galta and we put a counter on her, then we lose her when she goes away, but we also draw 13 cards. That seems all right. One way we care about mutants. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Next, we have Vorinclex. This is not a saga, but it's sort of like those Kamigawa flip sagas in that rather than starting as a saga and flipping into a creature, Vorinclex flips into the Grand Evolution. We'll talk about that in a moment. So for 3 and double green, we get a legendary Phyrexian Praetor that is a 6/6 with Trample and Reach. When Vorinclex enters, we search our library for up to 2 forest cards, reveal them, put them in our hand, and shuffle. So it sounds like 2 Lay of the Lands, where we find 2 basic forests, but it doesn't say the word basic in this ability. So again, we can find our typed duels if we want to. We can go get our bicycle lands or our tango lands, or if we have any nicer lands like a shock land or a surveil land, we can go find those. As long as they have the forest type, we can put them in our hand. So Vorinclex is kind of drawing us 2 cards when he comes in, and again is a 6/6 Trample Reach for 5. Amazing. But that's not all. For 8 mana, which is a lot, but we are finding 2 more lands when Vorinclex comes in, so we can get closer. For 6 and double green, at a sorcery speed, we can exile Vorinclex and return it to the battlefield transformed as the Grand Evolution. It will enter, and just like any saga, it will put a lore counter on itself and trigger its first chapter, which says mill 10 cards and put up to 2 creature cards from among the milled cards onto the battlefield. So as long as we hit 2 creatures in that 10, we get them for free. It's like drawing them and ramping them right out immediately. Either way, we're also putting a bunch of cards in our graveyard, which is something we can use in other ways. Chapter 2 is we distribute 7 +1/+1 counters among any number of target creatures we control. This does not say target creatures, this gives us a way to put our counters on all those creatures. It doesn't say put 1/1 counter on each of 7 creatures. So we can put all 7 on the same thing if we feel like it. Seems good. Again, putting counters on a lot of things is more helpful when we are proliferating, but if we want to just eat those counters, we can put them wherever we want. Yeah. Finally, until end of turn, creatures you control pay a generic mana, and this creature fights target creature you don't control. A really nice way of combining this with the last chapter of Binding the Old Gods, when all of our creatures have Death Touch. So, especially because this doesn't have our creatures immediately fight things, it just gives them the ability to do so for a single generic mana. Doesn't even require us to tap them. Nice. But that's not the end of the ability, because it also says, exile this Saga and return it to the battlefield, which means it'll come back front face up as Vorinclex. It will enter, and we will look for 2 forest cards again, reveal and put them in our hand and shuffle. So we can keep doing this with Vorinclex if we wish. We can also continually use our commander to do these things. We can mill 10 cards and put 2 creature cards from among them onto the battlefield over and over. Or we can put 7 counters on things. Eat that lore counter off the Grand Evolution. Next turn, put 7 more counters on it. Just keep going over and over with this. Or we can proliferate our way through it. Maybe our turn starts with us putting 7 counters on things. We use Xavier Sol to proliferate. We give all of our creatures the ability to fight, and we flip it back into Vorinclex, who then gives us 2 forest cards in our hand. Yeah, we can have a lot of fun with this. I do want to make mention, though, that our creatures gain the ability to fight other creatures for a single generic mana before Vorinclex re-enters as a creature, so Vorinclex itself will not have that ability, just so you know. Also, in case you're wondering, this is a really cool card. I wish I could play a commander deck with this as the commander. Check the video's description, because when I did a commander deck for every creature from March of the Machine, Vorinclex was one of them. So I'll link you to the video I made for Vorinclex in that description. Next, we have the Rise of Sozin. This is one of our board wipes for the deck. For 4 and double black, we have an enchantment, Saga, that Chapter 1 destroys all creatures. Sometimes you just gotta clear the board, and this is how we're doing it. Then, Chapter 2, choose a card name. Search target opponent's graveyard, hand, and library for up to 4 cards with that name and exile them, and then that player shuffles. So generally, it's commander, we don't need to search for up to 4 cards. Everything's singleton, we want to get rid of the cards or the 1 card that we think our opponent has somewhere in their graveyard, hand, or library that we don't want them to have back. We've seen a bunch of their cards that are in their graveyard, since the graveyard is a public zone, and we just destroyed all our creatures, so we can name a creature and make it so they can't reanimate it. We can also, if we've played with this player before, or if we have a good guess as to what kind of cards they might have in their deck, we can name their Rhystic Study, or their Smothering Tithe, or whatever game changer we want to get rid of, and go find it and make them exile it. It's also the case that this does not say choose a non-land or a non-basic card name. So if we think, wow, this Muldrotha player has been off their green for a long time, and it looks like they're running an awful lot of dual lands, I'm going to name Basic Forest as the card name, and then I'm going to look through their library and find up to 4 basic forests and exiles them. That is a little bit of a jerk move, but it's exiled from their graveyard, hand, and library, so it's not like we're destroying cards that are in play. However, if they have a particularly greedy mana base, people who play with those kinds of mana bases know they're setting themselves up for the possibility of being short on that color or on those lands. Rise of Sozin can let us play that way. It's not usually what I would do. I would rather just name, something that I haven't seen yet, because it seems fun to snipe something that is unknown to me, or to miss. Either way, that seems more fun to me. But you do have the ability to name basic lands with this, and then get rid of up to 4 of them from their library, graveyard, or hand. So yeah. Finally, the last ability is we exile it, and it comes back in as Firelord Sozin, a 5/5 legendary human noble with Menace and Firebending 3, meaning when we attack with Firelord Sozin, we get to put 3 red mana in our pool that lasts until the end of combat. Now notably, this here is reminder text. It's not rules text. The Firebending ability does make red mana, but this does not mean Firelord Sozin has red in its color identity. This is a mono black card. So we can put it in our deck for Commander color identity rules, just in case you're wondering. Also, this was Avatar Roku's best friend growing up. Also the one that began the Firelord's imperialist invasion of the world. Yeah, this is a villain, if you couldn't tell from just the mono black card. In any case, it says whenever Firelord Sozin deals combat damage to a player, we can pay any amount of mana, and when we do, we put any number of target creatures with total mana value equal to or less than the amount we paid from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. So we can reanimate multiple creatures from our opponent's graveyard, which we probably put into their graveyard thanks to our board wipe side, every time Firelord Sozin does combat damage to them, which is not hard for him to do because he's a 5/5 with Menace, And his firebending mana, that 3 red, is going to last until end of combat, so that includes when we get to pay this X. So we've already got 3 ready for us to, I guess, conscript some of our opponent's creatures into the Fire Nation army. Pretty good. More theft for us. Next, we have another Fallout card. This is Vault 12, the Necropolis. This is 4 and double black for a saga that says, Chapter 1, each player gets 3 rad counters. Now, what in the world are rad counters? Well, we'll talk about it here. I'm sure you know, this deck has an awful lot of tokens in it. But we're going to talk about the radiation mechanic from the Fallout decks. This is just a reminder token card that tells us how radiation works. Rad counters work like this. At the beginning of each player's pre-combat main phase, if they have any rad counters, they mill a number of cards equal to the number of rad counters they have, and for each non-land card they mill this way, they lose a life and they lose a rad counter. So it's unpredictable. Rad counters fade away over time, and as they fade away, it hurts the person who has them. So those counters are bad for most players, and they're not terrific for us because they can cost us life, but they do cause us to mill, and we care about cards in our graveyard in a number of different ways. So let's talk about our Necropolis. So, Chapter 1, each player gets 3 rad counters. We can just keep doing that if we want to eat the lore counter off of this with Xavier Sol and have it happen again to give our opponents more and more rad counters. Now, they may mill a bunch of non-lands and just take some damage and then lose the rad counters, which is fine. But we can also eat our creatures with Xavier Sol to proliferate those rad counters to keep giving them more and more to our opponents, and that seems pretty fun too. Because when we go to Chapter 2, we make a number of 2/2 black zombie mutant creature tokens equal to the total number of rad counters among players. That includes us. So we might have this happen a couple of times and then just proliferate those rad counters as we make in order to go to our next turn and make a bunch of zombie mutants. Notably, these are zombies and these are mutants. So we have cards that care about mutants, we've already seen. We've got Temerit Calls the Dead, which cares about zombies. A fun little intersection here. Finally, Chapter 3 is we put 2 1/1 counters on each creature we control. That's a zombie or a mutant. Really helps both of them. So yeah, there we go. We have, I think, one more card that cares about mutants. I'm not sure if we have any more cards that care about zombies, but we'll talk about them when we get to them. Anyway, the Necropolis seems like a fun one. Finally, a card that I've won with so many times and lost to probably even more. A terrific card from Theros Beyond Death is Kiora Best's the Sea God. Also, if you get a chance, look up the lore behind this, where Kiora fights Thassa and steals her Bident. Like, it's just a really, really cool story that shows how powerful clever planeswalkers can be, even in the face of the God of the Sea. So, 5 and double blue gives us a saga that, Chapter 1, we make a 1/1 blue Kraken creature token with hexproof. I'm sorry, an 8/8 Kraken creature token with hexproof. Huge Kraken with hexproof. I don't think it's a bad use of Xavier Sol's sorcery speed ability to just eat this counter and populate the token. So we remove the lore counter, make a second 8/8 with hexproof. Next turn, go to our first main phase, make a third 8/8 with hexproof, use Xavier Sol to eat the token again and populate that again, make a fourth 8/8 with hexproof. It just goes crazy. And we haven't even gotten to the second chapter, which is tap all non-land permanents and opponent controls. They don't untap during their controller's next untap step. So we look at opponent A, we go to our first main phase, we tap all of their creatures, we attack with probably a couple of our 8/8 Krakens plus everything else we have. And we just look at them and we know that unless they play more creatures or have some way to untap things during their next turn, their stuff is still going to be tapped down when we get to our next turn, so we can do it again, as well as our other mutual opponents can attack them as well. They are completely shields down. What if we do that to multiple opponents? What if we keep doing this to the same opponent until they are dead and then start doing it to another opponent? The first chapter ability is incredibly strong. The second one is also very strong. It can really help us out. Remember, it's not just creatures either. All their mana rocks get tapped down and they can't untap them during their next untap step. all of their artifacts that produce tokens or any of their other cool things that would need to be tapped in order to do something aren't going to get to, other than their lands, of course. So yeah, what a powerful second ability. Finally, we have another theft ability for the last one. Gain control of target permanent an opponent controls and untap it because it might be something that we tapped down ourselves. So it does not give it haste, so we can't attack with a creature that we steal right then, but we get to steal the best thing on the battlefield or someone's commander to turn off their synergy engine or whatever we may need. Kiorabest the Sea God, an incredible card, a great use of 7 mana. It's also the top of our curve. We don't have anything that costs more than 7 in this deck. So yeah, we can get an awful lot out of this. And that is our Sagas section. That's 30 cards, so that covers our game plan, but I want to talk about our cards that also do the things that Xavier Sol does right now before we move on to our support section. So we're going to talk about our counters section. These are all cards that either put counters on other things or put counters on themselves. Normally in my videos, I don't put cards in my counters tag unless they are a source of counters for other cards. But in this deck, we can use any counters, including ones that are put on a card by itself, for our commander, and we can proliferate them as well. So these are all the cards we have in our deck that care about counters. We're going to start with Astral Cornucopia. This is XXX for an artifact that enters with a number of charge counters on it equal to X. So that means if we spend 3 mana, 1/1/1, it enters with 1 counter on it. If we spend 6 mana, 2/2/2, it enters with 2 counters on it. You get it. And then it taps for a color. We choose a color and we add 1 mana of that color for each charge counter on the Cornucopia. So that means at its sort of floor, this is a manalith, because we're spending 3 mana on an artifact that taps for 1 mana of any color. That seems good. And that's probably how I would play this. Sometimes, I guess, you might draw this when you have a lot of mana and nothing else to do with it, so you might make X 2, or even 3. If you can spend 9 mana on this, it'll come in and you can immediately tap it for 3. However, what I would do is pay 3 into this with X equals 1. It comes in as just a manalith, and then I use Xavier Sol to proliferate the charge counters on it. So now we paid 3, and we sacrificed a creature, and it taps for 2. Next turn, if we do that again with Xavier Sol, it taps for 3, and we've gotten a huge rebate on what we've done, in addition to proliferating every other counter we proliferated with Xavier Sol both of those times we did it. So yeah, the Cornucopia can just get bigger and more powerful for us as the game goes on. Next, we have Basim Ibn Ishaq. I don't know how to pronounce this person's name, forgive me. I'm not an Assassin's Creed guy. Let me know in the comments if you know how to pronounce this. And a fun fact about this character, I do not know who they are. They seem cool. So yeah, this is a 2/2 legendary human assassin for a blue and a black. I guess I should call out, it's legendary, which means it's a historic spell, which is relevant for a lot of our cards, including Basim themselves. Whenever you cast a historic spell, it says, we draw a card. Basim then cannot be blocked this turn, but this only triggers once each turn. So every historic spell we cast, of which there are 45 others besides Basim themselves, will draw us a card, thereby replacing it in our hand, cantrips for us, and makes Basim unblockable. Well, why is that relevant? Well, whenever Basim deals combat damage to a player, we put a 1/1 counter on it. Meaning, every time we cast a historic spell, once Basim has gotten over its summoning sickness, we're going to draw a card, attack with Basim, do unblockable damage, and put a counter on Basim that we can now proliferate and make Basim even bigger and more deadly every time we attack with it, or we can eat those counters if we want to populate. Great. Next, we've seen Fall of Gil-galad. It puts 2 counters on a target creature we control on Chapter 2. The next card we have is Ominous Seas, 1 and a blue for an enchantment from Ikoria that says whenever we draw a card, we put a Foreshadow counter on this enchantment. Foreshadow counters don't have an inherent mechanical meaning, they're just used by the card that it's on, much like charge counters with Astral Cornucopia. Ominous Seas says if we remove 8 Foreshadow counters from it, we make an 8/8 blue Kraken creature token. It's not the same as the Kiorabest Sea God one because it does not have hexproof, but it's still an 8/8 creature that we can sure populate with our commander. But even if we don't want to get to that point, we could proliferate these Foreshadow counters to get us up to the moment when we're able to crack them and make the Kraken, get it? But it's also fine to just play a 2-mana enchantment that says every turn you draw a card and it gets a counter on it, and it doesn't matter what we can do with those counters other than just eat them with our commander to populate. We're not usually doing that in this deck because we have other counters that are more beneficial for us to eat, like our lore counters on our Sagas, but it's a nice other option for us. We have Ominous Seas just sit there, slowly gaining foreshadow counters, which is a way for us to sort of bank a bunch of fuel to let our commander do some populating. And eventually, we might be able to make this Kraken and start populating with it. That sounds maybe a little gross, but we can start populating it. And that's pretty good as a big beater. Finally, this is an Ikoria card, so it has cycling for 2 generic mana, meaning when it's in our hand, we can pay 2 and discard it to draw a card. If we just don't need the Ominous Seas right now, that's fine. Throw it away, find something else. Throw it back in the deep and go fishing again. Also, good flavor for our pirate commander. What can I say? We've seen Teachings of the Kirin. On the front side, it gives us counters. It does on the back side as well. Tender Wild Guide we have not yet seen. This is 1 and a green for a 2/2 Possum Druid that taps for 1 mana of any color, so it's a nice little mana dork. Or we can tap it to put a 1/1 counter on itself. So it does work out. It gets down and does a push-up, I guess, and becomes a little stronger. That's great. It puts a counter on it that we can either populate or eat in order to proliferate. It puts a counter on itself that we can proliferate, or that we can sacrifice with our commander, or remove with our commander in order to populate. There we go. But it also has Offspring for 2 generic mana, meaning when we cast it, we can pay an extra 2, so a total of 3 and a green. And if we do, when it comes in, it will make a 1/1 token copy of itself, meaning we will have 4 mana for 2 mana dorks, both of which, when we can tap them at all, can tap to put counters on themselves. And that seems great. Because imagine we've done that. We have a little 1/1 Tender Wild Guide, a little cute buddy. It's untapped. It no longer has Summoning Sickness. We tap it and put a counter on it. Then we tap Xavier Sol, remove that counter, and populate, making a second Tender Wild Guide 1/1 token. The next turn, we do the same thing with that token. And we just keep making more and more mana dorks every turn. This is a way we can turn our commander into a source of ramp. Neat. Speaking of ramp, we have Earthbender Ascension. 2 and a green for an enchantment that says when it enters, we Earthbend 2. What does this mean? It means we take one of our lands and it becomes a 0/0, I think, elemental creature that is still a land, so we can still tap for mana. We also put 2, since that's the number that it Earthbends, +1/+1 counters on it. So if this just turns one of our lands into a 2/2 creature, that also has this last line of text. If this creature would die or be put into exile, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control. So that means we have a land that is now a creature, and it doesn't matter if that creature dies or is exiled, it will come back tapped as just a land. It will no longer be a creature anymore. It won't have those counters, of course, because it left the zone that it was in. But yeah, we get it back, so we don't have to worry about losing it, which means we can sacrifice that Earthbent land, since it's a creature, to our commander in order to proliferate. When we do, we don't lose the land, it'll just return to the battlefield tapped. Sweet. That's very powerful. We can also proliferate the counters on it, making it a bigger creature, or eat those counters off of it to populate. And like I say, we can use this as though it were, we can use this for the same purposes as a token, as sacrifice fodder, but it is not a token itself, so we can't make more of these. Still, just when this enters Earthbend 2 gives us so much use in this deck, it's just great. But that's not all it does when it enters. After we Earthbend 2, we Rampant Growth. Search our library for a basic, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. Just this enters trigger gives us so much. Rampant Growth is 1 and a green. So we're paying 1 extra mana to also Earthbend 2, and that does so much for our deck. And that's only the first half of this card. It also has a landfall ability. Whenever we have a land enter, we put a quest counter on this enchantment. Again, quest counters don't have an inherent mechanical meaning, just used by this card, so we can definitely proliferate them, or we can remove them with our commander in order to populate. We probably want to proliferate them though, because when we do put a quest counter on it, if it then has 4 or more quest counters, we put a 1/1 counter on a creature we control, and that creature gains trample until end of turn. So we want more quest counters on Earthbender Ascension. It doesn't really matter how many we have once there's 4. It just then essentially reads landfall, put a counter on a creature you control and it gains trample. But this is more counters we can proliferate, more counters we can eat in order to populate. It puts more counters on things, gives an evasive ability. All of this works together in so many ways, and it's only for 3 mana. Great. Love this card in the stack. Next, we've seen Jugan Defends the Temple. It makes us a token, but also puts some counters on creatures, and can put more counters on creatures when they enter. Scurry Oak is next. This is 2 and a green for a 1/2 Tree Folk with Evolve, meaning while it's in play, whenever we have a creature enter, if that creature that entered has greater power or toughness than the Scurry Oak gets a 1/1 counter, which is terrific. We play a 2/2 that has 2 power, which is higher than its power, so it gets a 1/1 counter and becomes a 2/3. We play a 0/3, it has lower power, but it has higher toughness, so it still causes the Scurry Oak to evolve. And every time it gets a counter on it, whenever 1 or more 1/1 counters are put on this creature, we may create a 1/1 green squirrel creature token. So the Scurry Oak works for us in several ways. We can just, as long as we get 1 counter on this thing, we're also going to get a squirrel. We can then use Xavier Saul to sacrifice the squirrel to proliferate the counters on Scurry Oak, which will cause it to make another squirrel. So all we did was we proliferated everything by tapping our commander, and we have the same squirrel, essentially. It's a different squirrel, but we haven't lost our total aggregate number of squirrels. We can also have these counters, we can eat them off with our commander in order to keep populating and make more of the better counters that we have, or better creatures, I should say. Probably not squirrels, but maybe those 8/8 Krakens of either type would be pretty sweet. We've seen these several different sagas. We haven't seen Warden of the Grove, though. Maybe my favorite card from Tarkir Dragonstorm. This is 2 and a green for a 2/2 Hydra that says at the beginning of our end step, put a 1/1 counter on this creature. So it just gets counters and continues to get counters every turn, and once it's got that, we can start populating or proliferating those, or eating them off to populate. But we probably want to proliferate them, because whenever another non-token creature we control enters, it endures X, where X is the number of counters on this creature. So we want to get as many counters on the Warden as we can, because to endure means to put X 1/1 counters on that creature, or to make a spirit creature token with power and toughness equal to that X. So these are not counters themselves, it's just the defined number of the spirit creature's power and toughness. But these are our counters that we put on the creature that entered. So Warden of the Grove gives us everything we need. It puts counters on itself, it puts counters on other creatures, it makes creature tokens, we can populate, we can eat the counters off, we can eat the spirit tokens, whatever we need. This is helping us out in so many ways for just 3 mana. Izuri, Claw of Progress is another card that puts counters on players, this one on ourselves. This is 2, a green and a blue, for a 3/3 legendary Phyrexian Elf Warrior with a cool... I really like Izuri's face in this art, just creepy, scary jaw, the eyes, love it. It says, whenever a creature we control with power 2 or less enters, we get an experience counter. Again, experience counters are just used by the cards that list them. They don't have an inherent mechanical meaning. And we have a lot of creatures that are power 2 or less in the form of our tokens. So Izuri is going to make us an awful lot of experience counters whenever we have our creatures come in. And then at the beginning of combat on our turn, we put a number of 1/1 counters on another creature we control equal to the number of experience counters we have. So if we have 3 experience counters, we can put 3 1/1 counters on something else, and then maybe we use our commander to eat a creature and proliferate both the experience counters and those 1/1 counters. So the next turn we get to put even more experience counters on things. But look at what Izuri does when we have Scurry Oak in play. Let's say Scurry Oak already has 1 counter on it, and we have we'll just do it this way. We've got Scurry Oak in play, we play Izuri. Izuri comes in, triggers Evolve on Scurry Oak. Scurry Oak gets a counter, we make a 1/1 squirrel. The squirrel is power 2 or less, which triggers Izuri and gives us an experience counter. Then we go to combat, we put a number of 1/1 counters equal to our experience counters, which is 1, on the Scurry Oak. It gets a counter on it, makes a squirrel. That squirrel triggers Izuri and gives us an additional experience counter. Now, that's the end of it for that turn, But by playing Izuri, we've ended up with 2 squirrels, 2 more counters on Scurry Oak, and 2 experience on us, all from just having this enter. And we can keep going as much as we want, with all of our little creatures, just keep making them bigger, proliferating. Yeah, lots of fun. Next we have Genova, Ancient Calamity. This is another card that I have made another commander deck out of with Genova as our commander, so if you want to check that out, take a look in the video's description. This is 2, a black and a green, for a 1/5 legendary alien that says at the beginning of combat on your turn, put a number of 1/1 counters equal to Genova's power on up to 1 other target creature, and that creature becomes a mutant in addition to its other types. So another little bit of mutant synergy for us here. And a payoff for it, because whenever a mutant we control dies during our turn, we draw cards equal to its power. Dies during our turn is very easy to have happen in this deck because sacrificing creatures to our commander can only be done at sorcery speed. So yeah, we're getting that value there. We want to put a counter on something, make it into a mutant, sacrifice it to our commander, draw cards equal to its power, and since we've sacrificed a creature, we get to proliferate all of the other counters that we have access to. Hopefully, we found a way to put a 1/1 counter on Genova so that its power goes up, meaning we can put more counters on other creatures at the start of combat every turn since Genova's power is higher, and we can also proliferate those counters on Genova so that we have even more to go with, much in the same way we were doing with Izuri. Genova's a lot of fun. But I think even more fun is Mazarek, Crawl Death Priest. This is 3, a black and a green, for a 2/2 legendary insect shaman with flying. So a 5-mana 2/2 flyer is not a great rate, but it says whenever a player sacrifices another permanent, we put a 1/1 counter on each creature we control, including Mazarek itself. So how do we get people to sacrifice things? Well, anytime someone has a clue, or a food token, or a treasure token, activating those requires them to sacrifice it, or even that gold token that we got to see earlier. All of these tokens get sacrificed, and we get a counter on each of our creatures. We have a bunch of other ways to sacrifice creatures of our own, or non-land permanents of our own, and when we do, we get to put a counter on everything. It doesn't even say non-land permanent, so if someone cracks an Evolving Wilds, or a Fabled Passage, or a Terramorphic Expanse, we get a counter on each of our creatures. But the most important part of this is that when our sagas that are not flip sagas finish their final chapter ability, once it leaves the stack and that saga has at least enough counters on it, at least as many counters on it as it has chapter abilities, that saga will be sacrificed. It will go to our graveyard and Mazarek will see that and put a counter on each of our creatures. We can then eat those counters in order to populate, eat our creatures in order to proliferate. Oh wait, how are we eating our creatures? We're sacrificing them with our commander. So we sacrifice a creature in order to proliferate, and we stack the triggers so that Mazarek's trigger goes on the stack and resolves first, putting a 1/1 counter on each of our creatures, and then we let our Xavier Sol's sacrifice a creature in order to proliferate trigger resolve, and each of our creatures is going to get an additional 1/1 counter in addition to all the other things we were proliferating. Amazing. Mazarek's great in this deck. Next up, we have the Song of Eärendil, which of course puts flying counters on all the creatures we control. Vault 87 puts a 1/1 counter on a creature we control as Chapter 2, making it a mutant, relevant for Genova. Vorinclex, on the backside, puts 7 1/1 counters among our creatures. Rottenmouth Viper is 5 and a black for a 6/6 elemental snake from Bloomborough that says, as an additional cost, we can sacrifice any number of non-land permanents. Mazarek loves this. It doesn't have to be creatures, it can be any non-land permanent. So if we've got some treasures or gold or any of our little token things, many tokens that we make in this deck, we can sacrifice them to the Viper, and the Viper costs 1 generic less for each permanent sacrificed this way. So even if we don't do this, it's still a 6/6 for 6, and that's totally fine. Because it's a Titan. It has a trigger whenever it enters or attacks. When it does, we put a Blight counter on it. Blight counters are just used by the Viper, they don't have any other meaning. And then, as part of that same enter or attack trigger, for each Blight counter on the Viper, each opponent loses 4 life unless they sacrifice a non-land or discard a card. So this is sort of the Torment of Hailfire trigger, except it's 4 life instead of 3. So it's sacrifice something, discard a card, or lose X life, but this is an upgrade to 4 over 3. And this happens when it enters. We get a blight counter on it. Every opponent has to do that. We then sacrifice something to our commander and proliferate that blight counter. Now it has 2. We go to our next turn, we proliferate again, it has 3. We finally attack with the Viper, it puts another blight counter on it, and each opponent has to either lose 4, sack a permanent, or discard a card 4 times. That whole process 4 times. It could be that Rottenmouth Viper does 16 damage to a player if they don't want or have non-land permanents or cards to sacrifice or discard respectively before it even does combat damage, before it even connects. This can get absolutely out of hand. And it's intimidating enough that it's a little bit of removal bait. Our opponents can destroy this because it seems like it's doing so much damage to them, meaning that they're using a removal spell on this rather than something we'd rather keep, like our commander. I should have mentioned this, or I guess I could have mentioned this earlier in the video. It's a little annoying to have a 3-mana commander that requires 3 different colors of mana, whose entire shtick is activated abilities. It's not a bad card design, but it does mean we really don't get to do anything with our commander until turn 4, and if our commander gets removed, we have to spend a turn recasting it and waiting a whole turn cycle before we can, use its activated abilities again, unless we have a way to give it haste, which we have at least one of in this deck. But my point is, it's therefore a great way to protect our commander, or a great idea to protect our commander, and one of the ways to do that is by running creatures that are annoying or intimidating enough that our opponents use what little interaction they're likely running on those bigger, scarier things rather than our value-based commander. Just saying. Next up, we've got the Necropolis. We've already seen it. It puts 2 1/1 counters on each creature that's a zombie or a mutant as its 3rd chapter ability. And finally, we have Zola Toyak, the Smiling Flood, who I'll just refer to as Zola. This is a 6/6 legendary Salamander Serpent. Wait a minute, Salamander? So our Saga that makes Salamander tokens will actually help with this card? Amazing. Hopefully this card helps with those as well. Anyway, this is 4 a green and a blue for a 6/6 that says when it enters or attacks, so this is another Titan trigger, we put a flood counter on target land. Totally cool. Again, flood counters only used by Zola, but we can definitely proliferate them or eat them off the lands using our commander in order to populate. When we put that flood counter on that land is an island in addition to its other types for as long as it has a flood counter on it. Notably, the way this ability is written does not mean that if Zola is removed, that land stops being an island. The resolution of this ability that puts the counter on the land sets a replacement effect, making that land an island in addition to its other types as long as that flood counter is on it. The only way to remove its island status is to remove the flood counter, whether or not Zola is in play, just to make it clear about that. Now, we can remove those flood counters, but most other players' decks don't have ways to take counters off of their permanents. So, pretty nice. However, we don't have to put this flood counter on our opponent's cards just to turn them into islands for some reason. We can put them on our cards. If we have a Vernal Fen in play, which is a swamp forest, we can put a flood counter on it, and now it taps for black, green, and blue since it's an island as well. Nice. It's a way for us to make it so our cards that only tap for our lands that only tap for colorless mana can also tap for colored mana, albeit blue, to do a little bit of fixing for us, or we can just, put counters on our stuff, not worrying about the fact that it can fix our mana. It just gives us counters that we can eat to our commander in order to populate. But we can put these flood counters on our opponent's lands, making it so they then control an island, which then means that our salamanders, the salamander tokens we're making with that saga, can't be blocked because they have Island Walk. So they can't be blocked thanks to Island Walk, with Zola putting flood counters on our opponent's lands. And then that 3rd chapter ability on that saga goes off, and whenever a salamander we control, including Zola, that turn does combat damage to a player, it'll also do that much damage to a creature they control. Really neat. It's just 2 cards in this deck, but when it happens, it seems like a lot of fun. In addition, Zola says, at the beginning of your end step, untap each permanent you control with a counter on it. So any of our lands that we've put counters on, Zola will untap them so that we can use that mana on another player's turn. Sometimes we want to use that. We have a couple of activated abilities in this deck that require mana. Might as well. We also untap any of our creatures that have counters on them so that we can tap them for whatever use we happen to have that for, which might even be attacking, and then they're untapped so they can block again. Especially if we can put a counter on our commander. Yes, we can't activate his abilities at instant speed, but we can sure tap him down to use one of his abilities and then untap him, thanks to Zola, so that we've got him as a blocker or able to do other things for us. Because like I mentioned, we have different ways to tap our creatures for additional things. Like we've already seen waterbending as an example. There you go. So yeah, Zola's a lot of fun in this deck. And that covers our counter section. We're also going to look at our tokens here. We've got a bunch of these cards as well, but bear with me. We've seen a lot of them already because so many of our cards that make tokens or that put counters on things, or our sagas, also do tokens for us. So we'll just see a few new ones. Amina Seize can make us that 8/8 Kraken token. Teaches the Kirin can make us on the front or back these 1/1 spirits. Tender Wild Guide can have Offspring and make a 1/1 copy of itself. Tribute to Hirobi makes the 1/1 Black Rat Rogue creature tokens. Earthbender Ascension, a little bit of a misnomer. It is in this section, but it does not make tokens. I only put it here because of that Earthbend 2 ability, simply because you can read this tokens section as the fodder section. And that Earthbent land is good sacrifice fodder, but we cannot populate it. So, I went back and forth about whether or not I should put it in this section, but I don't want people to forget that land, because it will, when it is sacrificed, come back into play tapped as just a land, is a great thing for us to sacrifice to our commander in order to proliferate. So just want to call this out, make a note. It's not a token, but you can use it like one in at least one way. So that's why it's in this section, just as a reminder. Next up, we have a battle in this deck. This is Invasion of Segovia. If you haven't seen battles before, the way it works is this. When this enters, which it costs 2 and a blue to cast, we choose an opponent to protect it. And then every other player at the table, including us, is allowed to attack it as though it were a planeswalker that player controlled. So likewise, that player who's protecting it can block the same way they would if we were attacking one of their planeswalkers. Any damage that gets through is removed from these 4 defense counters that the invasion enters with. And once it is defeated, meaning it goes down to 0, it will be exiled and we can cast it no matter who attacked it and defeated it. We can cast it transformed. We'll cast it as this Saf. It does not have a casting cost because sieges are always cast, for free. I do want to make mention that even though a different opponent protects this, it is always in our control. That's why we exile it and we cast it, because we still control it. If you've played on Arena and you've seen them use battles, they put the battle on your opponent's side of the board because they're used to you attacking toward your own opponent's side of the board. It just makes it easier visually. But when I play with these in paper, I leave them on my playmat because it's a permanent that I control. So my opponent is going to have to look at my playmat anyway to see my attackers when they set up their blockers. So it's not actually making anything different. It just seems strange to me that the permanent I control would be on the other side of the board. But on Arena, it makes sense because you can look at every card without bothering your opponent. Anyway, Invasion of Segovia first comes in. We choose our opponent to protect it. It has 4 defense counters. And when it enters, we make 2 1/1 blue Kraken creature tokens with trample. They're 1/1s, but they have trample because of Segovia. If you don't know anything about Segovia, go to the Magic Wiki and read about it because it's pretty hilarious. Anyway, these are 2 1/1s, and that seems pretty good. We can pump them up, we can sacrifice them to our commander in order to proliferate, whatever we need. What we don't want to do is proliferate these defense counters, because we want to defeat this. We want to be able to flip it, exile it, and cast it as Caetus, Sea Tyrant of Segovia, a 3/3 legendary serpent that gives all of our non-creature tokens convoke, or our non-creature spells convoke. Meaning, all of the tokens and other creatures we have, we can use them to help cast our non-creature spells. And what do we have that are non-creature spells? Most of our sagas. In fact, all of our sagas that I guess aren't the Final Fantasy saga creatures. Some of our sagas have a creature on the other side, or are on the other side of a creature in the case of Vorinclex. But in any case, we have a lot of non-creature spells in this deck, and a lot of ways to make token creatures, so by convoking those non-creature spells, it gives us a lot of nice ramp for those non-creature spells. So yeah. In addition, at the beginning of our end step, we untap up to 4 target creatures. So this is doing a little bit of a Zola impression. We get to untap some things. That seems nice. Only creatures. But we get to choose whichever 4 we want. It doesn't matter if they have counters on them. Again, it would be nice to be able to untap our commander and be able to use that commander to activate his abilities at instant speed on other players' turns, but it is what it is. At least we're untapping 4 creatures probably after we've used those creatures to convoke or to attack or whatever we needed to use them for. So a pretty nice little effect for us. We've seen Jugan Defends the Temple, makes us that 1/1 human monk that's doing a good impression of Llanowar elves. Scurry Oak, every time it gets counters on it, makes us squirrels. Scoot Swarm is another piece of removal bait. This is a removal magnet. This is 2 and a green for a 1/1 insect with a landfall trigger. That's all it is. Whenever we have a land come in, all we do is we make a 1/1 green insect creature token, which is solid. Like, we can use those tokens for our commander in order to proliferate. Nice. Or we can populate those tokens if we want. However, it doesn't make that token if we control 6 or more lands when that land comes in, if it's the 6th land or later. Instead, it makes a copy of itself. So this enters, we play our 6th land, we make a 2nd Scoot Swarm. Then we play Earthbender Ascension, and we get to Rampant Growth. That land enters, the original Scoot Swarm and the copy both trigger. Now we have 4 Scoots, the original and 3 copies, 3 token copies. Then we populate, and we make a 4th copy, so now we have 5 Scoots. Next turn, we play a land. We have 10 Scoots. You can see how this absolutely gets out of hand. There are always more Scoot bugs. So yeah, Scoot Swarm can absolutely take over games. This helps us to proliferate because if we've got a lot of Scoots, or even just those 1/1 insects, if we play this early game, that's something that's easy for us to eat in order to proliferate all of our counters, especially the ones on our many sagas we'll have in play. Yeah. And if our opponents don't want to lose, they're probably going to try to take out the Scoot. So hopefully we play this when we already have 5 lands in play and another land in hand, so that we can immediately get a 2nd Scoot. So now they have to remove both of them in order to stop us from exploding. Nice. We've seen all of the Sagas and Warden of the Grove, which of course makes us endure tokens. We haven't seen Brightcap Badger, however. This is a 3/4 Badger Druid for 3 and a green that says each fungus and sapperling we control has tap to make a green. Notably, our commander is a fungus, so this makes our commander into a mana dork if we didn't want to already tap him to do other things, which, sometimes that's the case. And at the beginning of our end step, we make a 1/1 green sapperling creature token. So the Badger just keeps feeding us sapperlings. We can either populate, or sacrifice to our commander in order to proliferate, or tap for green. Pretty good. We just make mana dorks as long as the Badger's in play. But the Badger also has an adventure on it. So if you haven't seen adventures before, the way this works is this card in hand can either be played as a creature, and if so, we're just done, or it can be played as an instant speed spell called Fungus Frolic, which is an adventure. For 2 and a green, it lets us make 2 1/1 green sapperling creature tokens, and then we exile the card and we can play the Badger from exile. We don't even have to wait till another turn if we have the mana for it. So you can only ever go adventure and then creature. You can't play the creature and then while it's in play the adventure, even though Secrets of Strixhaven just came out and prepare spells look kind of like that. It doesn't really work that way. You've either got to send the Badger on an adventure and then have him come home, or maybe her, I don't know their pronouns, or you've just got to call the Badger in, and that means no adventure for them. So what's nice about this is, if you've got the mana for it, which would be 7 mana in the same turn, or just do it the adventure one turn and the Badger the next turn. If you cast the Fungus Frolic first, you get 2 sapperlings. Then the Badger comes in, and those sapperlings now tap for green, which means you kind of get a 2 mana rebate on the Badger, since you now have sapperlings as mana dorks. You go to your end step, and you get a 3rd sapperling. Pretty good. I really like the ability to continually make more sapperlings, and to get more value out of our sapperlings and fungus, because, fungus for our commander, come on. Next up, we have Phoenix Fleet Airship. This is a vehicle, 2 and double black, for a 4/4 vehicle with crew 1. So any of our creatures, except I think those 0/1 clerics from Rite of Belzenlock, can crew this and just give us a 4/4 flying creature once it's crewed. Because remember, vehicles become artifact creatures when they are crewed. So that means being a creature, it can be sacrificed to our commander in order for us to proliferate. And it's good if we sacrifice things. Maybe not the original Phoenix Fleet airship, but sacrificing anything. Because at the beginning of our end step, if we sacrificed a permanent this turn, we make a token that's a copy of this vehicle. So now we have 2 Phoenix Fleet airships, one of which is a token, which means if we crew that token, it is a token artifact creature, which means we can populate it. We can make another token that is a copy of that creature token. It will not itself be a creature, it'll just be a vehicle, but we can crew it itself. So it makes copies of itself, and those copies make copies as well. All that matters is it's our end step and we sacrificed a permanent this turn. So we can get more and more Phoenix Fleet airships in our Phoenix Fleet, both by populating and with its own ability as long as we've sacrificed things. This is not quite as good as Mazarek's ability, which triggers every time we sacrifice. This just triggers at our end step if we sacrificed. However, as long as we control 8 or more permanents named Phoenix Fleet airship, this vehicle is an artifact creature. That's true of it and all of its token copies. So as soon as we have 8 or more of them, they're all artifact creatures. We suddenly have a bunch of 4/4 flyers. So we've got, what, dragons, angels, however you want to think of it, demons, I guess, since they're black. Like, huge number of flying attackers, many of which are tokens, which means we can populate them, any of which we can sacrifice since they're creatures without having to crew them, thanks to Xavier if we just need to proliferate instead. So lots of work in this deck. Phoenix Fleet airship gives us a lot of value. We've seen Rite of Belzenlock, Legend of Kuruk, Song of Arundel. We haven't seen the new Tendershoot Dryad. This is not a new card, but it's a new piece of art from the Secrets of Strixhaven Commander product. Looks great. I like the original as well. It's from Rivals of Ixalan, I believe. Yeah, it is. This is 4 and a green for a 2/2 Dryad with Ascend. The Ascend mechanic means if at any time we have 2 things happening. One is we control a permanent with Ascend, like Tendershoot Dryad, and we control 10 or more permanents. 10 or more permanents includes all of our tokens, all of our lands, the Dryad itself. As long as we have 10 or more permanents of any type, and the Dryad itself, because it has Ascend, if we have both of those at any moment, we get a thing called the City's Blessing, and we will have it for the rest of the game. It does not matter if we drop below 10 or more permanents. It doesn't matter if the Dryad dies. All that matters is we had an Ascend permanent and 10 or more total permanents at the same time, and we suddenly have the City's Blessing. And we'll have it until the game is over. All of that to say, there's no cards that care about the City's Blessing except ones that have Ascend on it, and Tendershoot Dryad's the only one of those we have in this deck. So, now that you understand how the City's Blessing works, here's what the card does. This is a 2/2 for 5 that says at the beginning of each upkeep, create a 1/1 green Sapperling creature token. So these are Sapperlings, so our Brightcap Badger can let us tap them for green. Nice. But it does say each upkeep. It doesn't say the beginning of each of your upkeeps or the beginning of your upkeep. So this is going to make us a new creature at the start of each player's turn. We're going to get every turn cycle, if we have 3 opponents, we're going to end up with 4 Sapperlings in play, one of which will be Summoning 6 since it came in during our turn, and we can then sacrifice one of them to our commander in order to proliferate if we need to. Or we can populate these Sapperlings if we really want to do that. Either way, great. And as long as we have the City's Blessing, all our Sapperlings, not just the ones that the Dryad made, get +2/+2. So our Sapperlings stop being 1/1s and they start being 3/3s at least. That seems like something that's pretty good. We probably don't need to populate our Sapperlings if we, just get another Sapperling token, unless they're doing something for us like making mana with Brightcap Badger, because they're just 1/1s. It's better for us to sacrifice them to our effects that care about that, like our commander wanting to proliferate. But when they become 3/3s, and we're making a new 3/3 every upkeep, that can become a nice army for us of blockers who could work together to kill a big attacker. Eventually they can become even bigger. Maybe we put counters on all of our creatures thanks to Mazarek and start proliferating those. Yeah, it can just get out of hand. The Dryad is terrific for us. Next, we have a Planeswalker. This is Liliana Dreadhorde General. 4 and double black for a 6 loyalty planeswalker, Liliana. Recently reprinted in Foundations, so not cheap, but yeah, we didn't have to fight for it since it got a sweet reprint for a set that's legal for like 5 years in Standard. Liliana has a static ability that says whenever a creature we control dies, draw a card. I wonder how our creatures are going to die. Maybe our commander is just going to keep sacrificing them to proliferate. Anytime our creatures die in combat, or from a fight effect, or in other ways, sacrificed for anything else, Liliana replaces those creatures for us by drawing us cards. Some of those creatures weren't even creature cards. We just lost tokens and we get a card for it. That's a really powerful effect. In addition, she has loyalty abilities. +1, we can make a 2/2 black zombie creature token, so that's a token that we can sacrifice or block with or attack with, let it die and draw us a card. Great. -4, each player sacrifices 2 creatures of their choice. Now that is each player, it includes us. But we hopefully at least have 1 zombie, maybe 2 that we can sacrifice to that. We also have plenty of other tokens in all of our token generation in this deck. So the likelihood that it's hurting our opponents more than us is pretty solid in this deck. In addition to the fact that when we sacrifice those 2 creatures, they're going to die, which means we're going to draw 2 cards in addition to sacrificing those creatures. So even losing our creatures is good for us. Finally, if it's possible, at -9, if our opponents have let us get to -9 with Liliana, each opponent chooses a permanent they control of each permanent type and sacrifices the rest. So this is only our opponents, but they have to sacrifice all but 1 of their creatures, of their artifacts, of their enchantments, of their lands. Everything is gone. This is basically -9 win the game. Hopefully it is. It may not be if someone's got a huge board and is playing like a gain and drain, like a sacrifice aristocrat style deck. But as a sweet board wipe, yeah, it's hard to say no to Liliana Dreadhorde General, especially because loyalty counters are counters. So we can eat these counters off of Liliana if we want to, in order to populate. Or we can proliferate these counters by eating creatures of our own with our commander. That's what we want to do. We want to proliferate Liliana as much as we're able to, so that we can get up to the fact, or to the ability to do her -4 a couple of times, or to do her -9 and probably win the game. And in the process, if we play Liliana, make a zombie, sack the zombie to our commander, proliferate, we're now at 8 loyalty since +1 here and 1 more from the proliferation, and we draw a card in the process. We're so close to being able to -9 her already the same turn she comes in. Very powerful for us. I put her in this token section rather than in the counters section, even though she is also a counters card, just to make it clear that these counters work a little differently for us. The same is true of our Evasion of Segovia. Could have put that in the counter section as well, in order to represent its defense counters. But yeah, we've got both options for us in this section. And finally, we've got 2 more sagas that, of course, will make tokens for us. These zombie mutants and this 8/8 Kraken with hexproof. So that covers all of the cards that I've put into our game plan. And, oh hey, did you just like the video? Hey, thanks. Appreciate that. I'm just kidding. You don't have to like the video just because I asked you to. I'm grateful for you being here. Thanks for watching. Anyway, there's more where all that came from. We're going to go from our game plan now into these support sections to help prop up our game plan, starting with our card advantage section, which as usual I have tagged as draw. It doesn't mean that all these cards actively do the draw a card game action. It just gives us access to more cards. It's just an easy shorthand for us. So we've seen Basim. Basim actually does draw us a card whenever we cast a historic spell. Fall of Gil-galad gives us the ability to have the creature we choose in Chapter 3 die and draw 2 cards, and then that creature fights something, so it might die. Ominous Seas can be cycled for 2, that draws us a card. Tribute to Hirobi's backside, Echo of Death's Wail, when we attack with it, we can sack a creature to draw a card. Ballad of the Black Flag mills us 3 and lets us put a historic card from among the milled cards into our hand, so that's like drawing a card. Summon Fenrir, 3rd chapter ability, can draw us a card if we have the creature with the highest power on the battlefield, or tied for it. First to Rowan Games, Chapter 3, we will draw 2 cards if we have a power 4 or greater creature. The Huntsman's Redemption lets us sacrifice a creature in order to tutor for a creature or basic land. That's like drawing a card. We next have Crystal Skull Isu Spyglass. This is a legendary artifact, again from Assassin's Creed, for 2 and double blue. It says we can look at the top card of our library at any time, and we can play historic lands and cast historic spells from the top of our library. I don't think that we have any historic lands in this deck, which is fine, but you could certainly put some in if you wanted to. Historic lands like legendary lands or artifact lands. But we have a lot of historic spells, as I mentioned, 45 other than Isu Spyglass itself, or Crystal Skull itself, I guess. 44 of which could be in our library, since our commander likely isn't to be. So yeah, being able to look at the top card of our library and maybe cast off the top of our library is a nice piece of card advantage, especially because Crystal Skull taps for blue mana. Nice, it's a mana rock as well. We've seen Genova. When one of our mutants dies during our turn, we draw cards equal to its power. Legend of Kuruk lets us scry 2 and draw a card on its first 2 chapter abilities. Song of Arundel lets us scry 2 and draw 2 during its first chapter ability. Summon Shiva on its last ability draws us a card for each tapped creature our opponents control. Cruelty of Gix's second ability is Grim Tutor. Vault 87's third ability draws us cards equal to the greatest power among mutants we control. And Vorinclex not only puts 2 forests in our hand from our library when it enters, but also lets us mill 10 and put 2 creature cards from among the milled cards onto the battlefield, which is like drawing them and ramping them out right away. So yeah, that is our card advantage section. Next we have our acceleration, which again I've just shorthanded as ramp. We've already talked about Astral Cornucopia. It is a proliferable, either way, manolith for us, pretty good. Of course we're running Sol Ring. Sol Ring is 1 generic for an artifact that taps for 2 colorless. It's an incredibly powerful mana rock. We would love to have this. Similarly, Arcane Signet is 2 generic for a untapped mana rock that taps for 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity. So in this deck, blue, black, or green. It's an untapped rock that makes all of our colors. Of course we're going to run this. Love it. Next we have Farseek. Farseek is the rampant growth for our deck, even though we have several different rampant growth effects, I guess. This is 1 and a green for a sorcery that lets us search our library for a plains, island, swamp, or mountain, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. So even though we don't have any mountains or plains, we do have islands and swamps. So we can find one of those, preferably one that is dual typed, because it does not say basic, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. So we can find even more green mana for ourselves if we just find, like I mentioned earlier, a Vernal Fen, which has both the forest and swamp type. It is therefore a swamp, so we can find it with Farseek. Great. One of our 3 cards that let us tutor for non-basic lands, specifically Farseek, Vorinclex, and Binding the Old Gods. Yeah. Felwar Stone is next. This is another 2 mana rock that comes in untapped and taps for 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. So this is really cool. It gives us the ability to say, hey, all of our opponents are playing white and red and nothing else. Well, then this is an untapped 2 mana rock that we can use its mana to pay generic mana costs. That's totally fine. But if anyone in our commander pod is playing green, then this taps for green, and that's fine. If we have someone who is running all of our colors, or the same colors as us, or our colors are represented among the rest of the table, Felwar Stone taps for all of our colors. Or if one of our opponents has like a chromatic lantern, and therefore all of their lands can tap for any color, then so too can our Felwar Stone. Sweet. Sanctum Weaver is next. This is 1 and a green for an 0/2 enchantment creature, Dryad, that taps for an amount of mana of any one color equal to the number of enchantments we control, including itself. So this is a 2 mana dork that just gets bigger and bigger as our enchantment count goes up. Now, of course, our sagas do sacrifice themselves eventually, so Sanctum Weaver is not going to only go up in the amount of mana it makes, but for 2 mana, a dork that taps for 1 color, or 1 mana of any color, is already a pretty good rate, and having that be higher and higher seems good to me. We've already seen the Tender Wild Guide. It and its offspring, and any offspring we proliferate, or we populate, I guess, can all tap for 1 mana of any color. Earthbender Ascension comes with a free Rampant Growth staple to it. Jugan Defends the Temple comes with a human monk that sure looks like a Llanowar elf. North Pole Patrol is next. This is 2 and a blue for a 2/3 human soldier ally from Avatar: The Last Airbender that taps to untap another target permanent we control. Now yes, that could be just one of our lands. So we tap a land, tap the North Pole Patrol, tap to untap that land, tap the land again. Now we have 2 permanents that are tapped, and we've made 2 mana, so it's like the North Pole Patrol is a mana dork. But we can also tap we could also untap our Astral Cornucopia, or our Soul Ring, or our Sanctum Weaver, and make a lot more mana than just the one. It works great with all of those. But it also works with our commander. We tap our commander to use either of his abilities, and then we can use North Pole Patrol to untap our commander and use those abilities again. So this is one of our synergy cards as well. It helps us do the thing we want to do in this deck more times per turn than just one. Very cool. And that's not the last thing it has. It also has a Waterbend ability. If we Waterbend 3, meaning we pay 3 mana, or we tap artifacts and or creatures for a total of 3, and we tap the North Pole Patrol, we can tap a creature an opponent controls. I like to think that effects in Commander that tap creatures down, I think of those as evasion, because it means those creatures can't use their activated abilities unless they use it in response, and they can't block, basically. So it sort of gives us the ability to evade them. If it taps them down for more than a turn, like putting a stun counter on them or saying it doesn't untap during its controller's next untap phase, or a step rather, then I call that more of a removal effect, because it is temporary removal, but they are sort of out for longer than 1 turn. So I call this an evasion effect. But if you are able to get this to, get an opponent's creature to be tapped down so that they can't activate their own abilities, that's like removal for at least a turn. So yeah, we get a lot of flexibility here with North Pole Patrol. We've seen Summon Fenrir and the first Aroan games, and how they can rampant growth us and also make a gold token. The Weatherseed Treaty also rampant growths us for its first chapter ability. Binding the Old Gods finds us a forest in its second chapter ability and puts it on the battlefield tapped, so it's better than rampant growth. Brightcap Badger makes us Sapperlings, both with its adventure and with its instep trigger, and makes all of our fungi and Sapperlings tap for green. Crystal Skull is just a mana rock that taps for blue, and Song of Yarendel makes us a treasure token in its second chapter ability. So all of these are good acceleration, and yeah, that is our acceleration section. Next up, we have a discounts section. I've got it listed here because it kind of goes along with our mana management that we would do with acceleration. We've already seen Ballad of the Black Flag. Its last chapter ability makes our historic spells cost 2 less to cast. And next we have Joyrus Familiar. This is a 4 mana, 2/2 artifact creature, bird. It flies, and it makes all of our historic spells cost 1 less to cast. So this doesn't apply to every historic spell in our deck. Like I mentioned, some of our historic spells don't have a generic mana cost. But it applies to enough of them that it's worth putting in our deck. I don't like to put discounts effects, like cost reducers like this, in my deck unless it applies to 40 different cards, because otherwise the math works out to be, don't run a cost reducer, just run another mana rock or another land even. But in this deck we've got plenty, so yeah, Joyrus Familiar fits right in, and notably is historic itself. So if we have Ballad of the Black Flag's last chapter ability happening, we can play Joyrus Familiar for just 2, and now it's discounting all of our other historic spells. Neat. That's our discount section. Let's look at our interaction now, which I've just tagged as removal. We have a lot of these that we've already seen. Fall of Gil-galad gives us the ability for one of our creatures to fight and maybe have us draw 2 cards if it dies in the process. Tear Asunder is next. This is 1 and a green for an instant with Kicker for 1 and a black, meaning we can kick it and thereby pay 2 a black and a green if we wish. What it does is it exiles an artifact or an enchantment, so it's a better version of Naturalize on its face. And if we kick it, instead, we exile target non-land permanent. So either 2 mana to get rid of an artifact or enchantment forever, or 4 mana to get rid of anything that's not a land forever. Great, good flexibility. We've seen Awaken the Undead, destroys a non-land permanent when it first comes in. The Sea Devils lets us have our Salamanders bites a creature once they deal combat damage to a player at Chapter 3. Chapter 1 of Binding the Old Gods destroys a non-land permanent and opponent controls. Time of Ice taps down our opponent's creatures, but also bounces all tapped creatures our opponents control. Summon Shiva lets us tap creatures and put stun counters on them. Summon Valifor does the same thing, but also bounces the creature with the greatest mana value that each opponent controls during its first chapter ability. The Eldest Reborn has each opponent sacrifice a creature or planeswalker. Vorinclex gives all of our creatures the ability to have us pay 1 generic and fight other creatures we don't control at Chapter 3. Liliana, we can make every player sacrifice 2 creatures. Rottenmouth Viper gives our opponents the option to either pay 4 life or discard a card if they don't want to sacrifice a non-land permanent when it enters or attacks based on the number of blight counters on it. And finally, Fear of Sleep Paralysis is 5 and a blue for a 6/6 enchantment creature, Nightmare. So this is an enchantment that flies and has an Eerie ability. Eerie says whenever this creature or another enchantment you control enters, and whenever you fully unlock a room. We don't have any rooms in this deck, so this is really just whenever this creature or another enchantment we control enters. And remember, we're running 32 other enchantments in this deck. We tap up to 1 target creature and put a stun counter on it. Now that's pretty okay removal for every time we have one of our Sagas enter, or even our Kamigawa flip Sagas that flip over to the back and now it's an enchantment creature, that's another enchantment entering, so it's more than just 32 cards that might be entering for us. But it doesn't just say that, it says stun counters can't be removed from permanents your opponents control. So this works with stun counters we put on those creatures with a Fear of Sleep Paralysis, stun counters that go on thanks to either one of these 2 summons. Just being able to keep those things locked down forever with our Fear of Sleep Paralysis in play is really great. Love that. So that is our interaction section. As we've seen, we're running 2 Wraths, and we've seen both of them already. Liliana, if we can get to the -9 ability, which is not actually that far out of reach in this version of, in this deck at least, as opposed to many other decks that love this card and can't get to it. Totally good for us. Yeah, probably wins us the game. We've also got the Rise of Sozin, which just destroys all creatures as its first chapter ability, and we can get some value out of that by reanimating them, stealing them from our opponent's graveyards when Sozin flips and does damage to our opponents. Yeah. So that's our Wrath section, and that is all of our support section. We have a few more sections I want to go through just to talk about the way our cards work and a couple of cards to supplement our game plan. We will start with our Payoff section. Payoffs are cards that reward us for what we were going to do anyway. So here are the examples we have. Basim cares about us casting historic spells, thereby drawing us a card. Next we have Evolution Witness. This is 2 and a green for a 2/1 Elf Shaman Mutant. It's a mutant, pretty good, that says pay 1 and a green and adapt 2. Adapt is a little bit of a weird mechanic. It says put 2 1/1 counters on this creature if it doesn't have any 1/1 counters on it. Meaning we can activate this over and over, and each time we activate it, if it already has counters on it, it just won't do anything. Kind of a weird mechanic that way. However, when 1 or more 1/1 counters are put on this creature, we return target permanent card from our graveyard to our hand. So this is one of my favorite ways in this deck to bring our stuff back, particularly our Sagas that have been sacrificed because they were done telling us the story, so that we can retell that story. It's nice because we adapt the Evolution Witness for just 2 mana, and then every time we want to put more counters on it, we just proliferate our counters using our commander. Pretty sweet. Scurry Oak, we've already seen, gives us a squirrel creature token whenever we put counters on it. That is nice for us to either populate or sack to proliferate and put more counters on it. Izuri gives us experience counters and thereby +1/+1 counters whenever we have small creatures like our many tokens enter the battlefield. Genova draws us cards based on the number of, based on the power of whatever mutant we control when we have a mutant that we control die on our turn. Phoenix Fleet Airship rewards us for sacrificing creatures by making a copy of itself at our end step if we did that. Mazarek, sacrificing permanents, I should say. Mazarek also cares about us sacrificing permanents and rewards us for it every time we do by putting a counter on each of our creatures. Fear of Sleep Paralysis, goodness, taps down opponents' creatures and stuns them every time we have enchantments enter under our control, which we're doing a lot of. And Lily knows we're going to be sacrificing creatures and having them die, so she gives us a card every time that happens. That is our Payoff section. Next up is our Synergy section. These are cards that care about the number of other things we have in play and also help us do the things that we're doing when we do them. So we've seen 4 of these. North Pole Patrol gives us the ability to untap, particularly our commander, so we can use our commander a second time. so does Marvin Murderous Mimic. This is 2 generic mana for a 2/2 legendary artifact creature toy, so both legendary and an artifact, so it's doubly historic. Marvin has all activated abilities of creatures we control that don't have the same name as Marvin, meaning Marvin has both of our commander's abilities. So when Marvin is no longer summoning sick, we can use Marvin as a second version of Xavier Sol and just continually use all of our populates and proliferates multiple times every turn. We can also have Marvin, if we don't want to do the Xavier Sol thing with him, or maybe our commander's been removed, so Marvin no longer has those abilities because Xavier Sol's not in play, well, North Pole Patrol has activated abilities, so we can activate those abilities on Marvin as well. Jugan Defends the Temple makes us this monk, which has an activated ability of tapping for green, so we can do that with Marvin. If we have Saprolinks in play and Brightcat Badger has given those creatures the ability to tap for green, and so Marvin has the ability to tap for green that same way. Neat. Lots of cool stuff with Marvin. Jugan Defends the Temple is in this section because it counts the number of modified creatures we control in order to get bigger. That's important. And Evasion of Segovia, especially Kaetus and Zola, are both in this section because they both untap our creatures, and that can help us out a lot with the ability to repeatedly do things like activate our abilities, and they're particularly in this deck if you choose to upgrade this deck to put in a couple of cards that let us activate Xavier Sol somehow on other turns. Kaetus and Zola can help us with that as well. But just being able to untap all of our permanents with counters and 4 other creatures each end step are pretty good effects as well. In addition to being able to convoke things with Kaetus. Nice. So that is our synergy section. We have some uses as well. These are cards that give us ways to use our mini creatures, particularly our tokens, beyond just eating them with our commander. We have other ways to sacrifice them, of course, but we also have some waterbending and some theft. So, for example, Tribute to Hirobi's backside, Echo of Death's Wail, lets us sacrifice our creatures to draw cards when it attacks. Evasion of Segovia's backside, Kaetus, gives us the ability to tap our creatures for Convoke whenever we cast non-creature spells. North Pole Patrol lets us waterbend with our creatures to tap a creature an opponent controls. Huntsman's Redemption is another sack outlet, letting us sack a creature so we can find a creature or basic land card. Rite of Belzenlock makes a demon that forces us to feed creatures to it if we don't want to take 6 damage from it every upkeep. That seems like a good use of our creatures. The Legend of Kuruk's backside does have this Waterbend 20 ability, so that is a way we can use them. Trickster God's Heist lets us exchange control of 2 target creatures and then 2 target non-basic non-creature permanents. So that's a good way to use our tokens and of course our other creatures by giving them away and getting something better from them. Liliana lets us use our creatures because she's not really a sacrifice outlet, she forces people to sacrifice, but it works similarly enough that I put her in this section. And also Rottenmouth Viper lets us sacrifice any number of non-land permanents as we cast it to reduce its cost by 1, or by 1 generic that is, for each thing we sacrifice. So that is our uses section. Next we have our graveyard section. I called these cards out just because these are all ways to put things in our graveyard, and some ways for us to use those things in our graveyard. Like Teachings of the Kirin it has us mill 3 for its first thing. But then on the backside, whenever the Orochi attacks, we can exile creature cards or non-creature cards from graveyards, including our own, to make tokens or put counters on things. Good either way. Awaken the Honored Dead lets us regrow something from our graveyard, but first it has us mill 3 cards and discard a card, and destroy an online permanent, which might be one of ours. You never know. Ballad of the Black Flag has us mill 3 for each of its 3 first chapter abilities before we take a historic card from among the ones we milled and put it in our hand. King Narfi's Betrayal has each player mill 4 cards, and then we can exile a creature or planeswalker from each graveyard. Temerret Calls the Dead lets us mill 3 and then exile a creature or enchantment from our graveyard to make a zombie. Vorinclex, on its backside, the first chapter ability has us mill 10 and put 2 creatures from among the ones we milled onto the battlefield. Finally, Vault 12 gives rad counters, which cause us and everyone else who has them to mill. So yeah, graveyard filling is the thing we're doing. and that is our graveyard section. Next up, we have ways to get things out of the graveyard. It's our recursion section. We've already seen Awaken the Honored. We've seen all of these, really. Awaken the Honored Dead lets us get a creature or land from our graveyard if we discard something in its third chapter. Evolution Witness lets us get a permanent card back from our graveyard every time it gets counters on itself. The Acer Escape Valhalla is a slow but repeatable way for us to get permanent cards back from our graveyard and get value out of them in the process in the form of life and counters. Cruelty of Gix and the Eldest Reborn both are theft abilities that let us bring a creature or planeswalker back from a graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. That is our recursion section. We have an evasion section as well. These are cards that help us sneak past our opponents or just trample over them, I suppose. Past our opponent's defenses, that is. Earthbender Ascension, once we have 4 or more quest counters on it, when it has triggered to put at least that 4th one on it, we put a 1/1 counter on a creature we control and it gets trample until end of turn. North Pole Patrol can tap down a creature an opponent controls, letting us sneak past it. The Huntsman's Redemption's last ability gives up to 2 of our creatures +2/+2 and trample each. That seems good this turn. The Sea Devils, it makes island walking alien salamanders. I don't know what to tell you, it's just hilarious. The Weatherseed Treaty, much like the Huntsman's Redemption, can give one of our creatures a power and toughness boost and trample until end of turn. Song of Yarandel makes all of our creatures that don't already have flying because they get a flying counter. And Kiorobes the Sea God taps all non-land permanents that target opponent controls. If this was every opponent, I would say this is more of a Wrath effect, kind of, or removal, even though it's kind of similar to other removal effects we have. Because it hits everything that an opponent controls, I think of it as an evasion, lets us sort of trample in, or attack in, I should say, without having to worry about any kind of blockers. So that is that evasion section. We have this section of theft cards. I just wanted to collect them to show we have so many ways to steal things as a pirate. So Tribute to Hirobi's backside steals all of these rat tokens, or any other rat tokens that may be in play. King Narfi's Betrayal lets us cast spells that are exiled with it, which will be, hopefully, 1 card from each player's graveyard that we exiled with its first chapter ability. Death in Heaven lets us exile at least 2 graveyards, hopefully, and then steal all the creature cards from them. Even though we don't get to use them as they are printed, we just use them as face-down creatures that are 2/2 Cyberman artifact creatures, but still pretty good as a nice theft. The Trickster God's Heist, we've talked about a bunch. We get to steal creatures, we get to steal non-creature permanents that are non-basic. Yeah, pretty good. Cruelty of Gix and the Eldest Reborn both let us reanimate a card that doesn't have to be from our graveyard. It's good. Forced Evolution steals a non-mutant creature from an opponent as long as we control it. I should call it Vault 87. A Vault 87 Forced Evolution. There you go. The Rise of Sozin, on its backside, if Firelord Sozin does combat damage to a player, we can pay to reanimate cards from that player's graveyard. Creature cards, that is. And Kiorobes the Sea God, its last ability, gains us control of a permanent an opponent controls and untaps it, and that's permanent for the rest of the game. Nice. That is our theft section. We have one more section, and it's the protection section. It only has 1 card in it that we haven't seen, and 1 card at all. It's the Swifties. Swiftfoot Boots is 2 generic mana for an equipment that equips for 1 and gives the equipped creature hexproof and haste. Giving haste to our commander, or to Marvin, or to any of our other creatures is powerful, but particularly our commander, or any copy of our commander, so that we can use their abilities right away, mitigates the thing I was saying earlier about how it's sometimes a little bit of a pain to be building a deck around a commander who has activated abilities and then getting that commander removed, so we have to recast them and then wait to untap with the activated abilities. So Swiftfoot Boots, for just a single mana to equip, gets around that with haste, but more importantly, giving them hexproof so they don't get removed in the first place. That seems pretty great. One last thing to know about the Swiftfoot Boots, they are an equipment, which means they are a modification. So Remnant of the Rising Star counts whatever creature has this on it, even if that creature doesn't have counters on it, as being modified. So that can be helpful to us. Yeah. And that covers every one of the spells in our deck. As usual, we're going to go over our land base now, starting with our basic lands. We've got, obviously, Lost Caverns of Ixalan lands. I tried to use the most, like, fungal or, kind of exploring, like a pirate arts I could find. We are mostly green, but we have about the same amount of blue and black cards in the deck. and this balance works out to be just fine. We do want to make sure we have plenty of basics because we have a bunch of rampant growth type effects that let us find them. We also have all 3 of our bicycle lands. We use Rain-Slicked Copse as an example. This is a forest island that comes in tapped. So a tap land that has 2 basic types, meaning it taps for green or blue since it has those types, but also is findable by our fetch effects, like Binding the Old Gods, which can find a forest, Vorinclex, which you can find forests, or Farseek, which you can find islands. So yeah, any of them can find this. This is just a tap land that taps for our colors, seems good. It also can cycle for 2 generic mana, meaning if it's in our hand, we pay 2, discard it, and we draw a card. Something we might do if we draw it late game and we have enough mana, we don't need any more, or if we're just desperate for card draw when we've gotten it early, we spend 2 of our mana and spin the wheel and hope to get something better. We've got every one of our bicycle lands in our colors, so all of these are fetchable in the ways that we need to fetch things. So yeah, good. If you wanted to upgrade these, I might suggest upgrading to the shock lands. They're much more expensive, but they do a little bit more. I do like the flexibility of cycling these, so I might go for just the cheaper ones, but your call. We're running all 3 check lands in our colors as well. Drowned Catacomb is our example. This is a land that taps for blue or black and enters tapped unless we control an island or a swamp, so the corresponding basic types. It doesn't say basic island or swamp, however, meaning if we have one of our 4 islands or 4 swamps in play, that's great. But also, if we have any of our bicycle lands, this is a forest, this is a swamp, and this is a forest and a swamp. No, I'm sorry, this is a forest and a swamp, this is a swamp, and this is a forest. There we go. I can read cards. So yeah, any of our bicycle lands will count for any of our check lands, and the Tangle lands are true for these as well. So these are just a very inexpensive way for us to get out our colors. I wish that Drowned Catacomb was as inexpensive as the other 2, but it just needs a reprint. If you wanted to upgrade these, I might suggest upgrading to the slow lands. Some of those are starting to get cheaper, thanks to the reprints in Secrets of Strixhaven into Standard. But for now, you know, the slow lands are a little bit more expensive, and I think the check lands are a great inclusion as well. And thanks to the fact that we have all 3 bicycle lands and all 3 Tango lands and 15 basics, that means we've got 21 cards in our deck that will qualify for our check lands. So a good way to use our mana. We've got 5 fixing lands. We start with Command Tower. It is an untapped land with the same text as Arcane Signet. So it taps in this deck for blue, black, or green. Pretty good. Untapped tri-land. We would run it if it was a tap land. And we are. It's Path of Ancestry. This is a tap land with the same text as Command Tower, and it also says whenever this mana is spent to cast a creature spell that shares a creature type with our commander, we scry 1. So our commander is a human fungus pirate. Great. We don't have any other fungus or pirates in this deck, and that's okay. We have 2 other humans though, so that's fine. But yeah, it's good for casting our commander, good for casting either of those other 2 things, and otherwise is a tapped tri-land, so yeah, we don't mind it. We're also running Exotic Orchard, which, if Command Tower is the land version of Arcane Signet, this is the land version of Fellwar Stone. It taps to add 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. So everything I said about the Fellwar Stone is true here as well. Very nice for us. It's also nice if an opponent is running an Exotic Orchard, because that means our Exotic Orchard sees theirs, which sees our other lands. So this card, our Exotic Orchard, taps for any color that our lands can produce. Pretty sweet. We're running Blighted Woodland as a sort of a fetch. This is a land that comes in untapped and taps for colorless, and we can pay 3 and a green, tap and sack it to Explosive Vegetation, which is a double rampant growth. We search our library for 2 basics, put them on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. So while this is a large mana expenditure, it does turn our single land drop into 2 lands that both make colored mana. So that's nice for us. Oftentimes I will run Myriad Landscape, but Myriad Landscape comes in tapped, even though it requires half as much mana to activate. Yeah, and this comes in untapped and requires green, so yeah, I like to run Blighted Woodland in my decks with green rather than Myriad Landscape as a little bit of ramp in our land base. Similarly, we have Temple of the False God. It's not everyone's favorite card, but it is a card that comes in untapped, taps for 2 colorless mana, like Soul Ring. It's a soul land. we just can't activate it unless we have at least 4 other lands, so a total of 5 including itself. So even though this is slow, we can't use it, it doesn't do anything for us early on, there's a lot of times where you draw your 7-drop in the first 5 turns of your game and you're not going to be able to cast it. This seems like a dead card, and if your opening hand is like Demolition Field and Temple of the False God and no other mana sources, you probably do want to mulligan that. But being able to accelerate yourself from 4 mana to 6 on turn 5, or just accelerate it at all, any little bit of extra mana advantage, even if it doesn't happen early in the game, which is admittedly the best time for it, it's still helpful mid and late game. So yeah, Temple of the False God, nothing wrong with it. We run it in our decks. We've got all 3 Pain lands in this deck. Yavimaya Coast is our example. This is an untapped land that taps for colorless, but also taps for green or blue if we're willing to let it do a damage to us. The way I normally talk about these, as well as the talismans that imitate them, is they're fantastic. If we're not going to use the colored mana, we just tap it for colorless. But if we need the colored mana, then the idea of needing it is based around the idea that if we didn't tap this for colored mana, we wouldn't be able to cast a spell at all. So this is now the difference between paying a life and casting a spell. What would you choose? Would you choose to lose 1 life in order to cast 1 extra spell on your turn? I sure would. If we do this 5, 6, 7, 8 times throughout the game, that means we've cast 5, 6, 7, or 8 extra spells that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to cast. And if we don't need that colored mana, again, just tap for colorless. I love the Pain lands. So we've got 1 of each type. And I don't typically recommend an upgrade for these. I guess you could sort of side grade to the pathways. I think the Pain lands are better, and the pathways are more expensive, but I do like both, so yeah. We've got here our Tango lands. The way they work is they are dual type lands, so Sunken Hollow is an island and a swamp, so we can fetch it with Farseek if we want to. And it enters tapped unless we control 2 or more basic lands. Now we only have 15 basics in our library, which is a lot more than some people run, I know, but it's a little low for my taste. However, we have a number of different effects that are just rampant growth. The Weatherseed Treaty, Earthbender Ascension. Being able to go and find just a basic land and put it into play tapped means that these Tango lands sometimes come in as untapped duels. And when they don't, they are fetchable by our fetch effects, and we can get them to come in tapped anyway, the way we might with Farseek, or with, what am I thinking of? Binding the Old Gods, there you go. Yeah, can't get Binding the Old Gods and get Sunken Hollow, but because it has to get a forest, but we can't find, I guess we can find any of these with Binding the Old Gods, either one of these, but Farseek can find any of these 3. Yeah. Anyway, there we go for our Tango lands. And again, if you wanted to upgrade these, you might do Shock lands. You could certainly do the Surveil lands, also pretty expensive, but dual typed, pretty good. We've got a Tri-land. It's Opulent Palace. This is a tap land that makes all 3 of our colors. That's all it does. So it's a worse Path of Ancestry, which is a worse command tower, and it's still worth running. Just a tapped Tri-land, very nice flexibility for us. If you wanted to upgrade this, Zagoth Triome from Ikoria is a Triome, so it enters tapped, taps for all these colors because it is all 3 of these land types, these basic types, and, it's got the ability to cycle for 3, but it's also a lot more money. Finally, we have our utility land section. Demolition Field goes into most of my decks, because even though the kind of decks I build are a power level that normally fits pods where people just aren't really looking for a way to destroy each other's lands, that's not the experience they want to have, but you do have to have an answer to problematic non-basics. Like, I usually give the example of a Rogue's Passage for someone who's playing a Voltron deck and building a huge commander and just slamming in unblockably. You want to get rid of that Rogue's Passage because their land is empowering that opponent's game plan too much. Or if you have an opponent with a land that is stopping our game plan, like a Glacial Chasm stopping us from doing damage to them, we want to be able to deal with those threats. Demolition Field is my answer for that. It's an untapped land that taps for colorless, but we can also pay 2, tap, and sack it to destroy a non-basic that an opponent controls, and then that opponent gets to search their library for a basic land and put it on the battlefield untapped. And so do we. So neither we nor they are down a land, but that problematic non-basic is gone, and we both have lands in play, assuming we still had basics in our library, that we can use right away. Great. Next is Fountain Port. Fountain Port just gives us a lot of options and acts as a good mana sink for us. It's an untapped land that taps for colorless. We can pay 2, tap, and sack a token, of which we have many, to draw a card. So turning our tokens into cards sounds pretty good for essentially 3 mana, 2 and tapping the Fountain Port. For 3 and tap and paying a life, we can make a token. We get a 1/1 blue fish creature token. Nice to have a fish. And if we just have some extra mana lying around and we want to bank it for next turn, we can pay 4 and tap Fountain Port to make a treasure. Sweet. Next is Karn's Bastion. This is an untapped land, taps for colorless, but if we pay 4 and tap it, we can proliferate. So an extra source of proliferate in our deck. A lot of decks that use so many counters have a lot of different sources of proliferate. In ours, we're just counting on our commander to proliferate for us. But if we've got some extra mana lying around, Karn's Bastion can help us out with that. Get a little bit more in the way of our counters. Nesting Grounds is next. This is an untapped land, taps for colorless, and if we pay 1 and tap it, we can move a counter from target permanent we control onto a second target permanent. Doesn't say second target permanent that we control. Activate only as a sorcery. So we can, I suppose, use this politically by moving, I don't know, a 1/1 counter from one of our creatures onto an opponent's creature. Or something along those lines. But we can definitely move our counters around, like moving a 1/1 counter from one of our creatures to one more of our creatures. Or we could, if we think there's going to be a board wipe, we might want to take one of our special counters. Or we could just say a 1/1 counter and move it off of one of our creatures onto, let's say, Nesting Grounds itself, so we can move it back later. Maybe we want to do that. Maybe we want to move a 1/1 counter onto our Scurry Oak and make another squirrel token. But the best thing we can do with Nesting Grounds is move a lore counter off of a saga we have and either put it on Nesting Grounds or any other non-saga permanents to just sort of hold on to it so that we can get a little bit more acceleration on a different saga, or we just accelerate right away. We move it from one saga to a different one. Let's say we play 2 sagas on the same turn. They're both at chapter 1. We use Nesting Grounds to move one of those lore counters from one of those sagas onto the second one. The second one gets its next trigger. Then next turn, we'll get the third trigger on the second one and the first trigger on the first one again. So yeah, we can do a lot of fun playing with Nesting Grounds, albeit at sorcery speed, but we already have to work that way with our commander, so not that big of a drawback. Finally, we have Evasion, Heart of Progress. This is an untapped land, taps for colorless. We can also pay a green and a blue and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature that entered this turn. Now yes, we can use it politically. It doesn't say on your turn or activate only as a sorcery, so we can do this on our opponent's creatures. But it's nice to be able to say, for the extra price of 3 mana, a green, a blue, and tapping Evasion, if we make a bunch of tokens, they all get a counter. If we play some creatures, they all get a counter. Seems solid. Just a nice way to add counters to things that we can then proliferate or use those counters with our commander to populate. Both work for us pretty well. And that sums it up. Again, thanks to Joshua Rees 4097 for requesting this commander, as well as for waiting for me to fit it into my weekly rotation. If you'd like to request a commander deck and you're the patient sort, let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you want to support what I do here, make sure to like and subscribe. Ring the bell if you want to be notified when my videos go live. Consider becoming a member of the channel. And most of all, remember that magic is fun. You should play more Magic.